File 15 of Farthest North, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskedahl. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 1. Chapter 7. The Spring and Summer of 1894, Part 1. So came the season which we at home call spring, the season of joy and budding life, when nature awakens after her long winter sleep. But there it brought no change. Day after day we had to gaze over the same white, lifeless mass, the same white, boundless ice plains. Still we wavered between despondency, idle longing, and eager energy, shifting with the winds as we drift forwards to our goal or are driven back from it. As before, I continued to brood upon the possibilities of the future and of our drift. One day I would think that everything was going on as we hoped and anticipated. Thus, on April 17th, I was convinced that there must be a current through the unknown polar basin, as we were unmistakably drifting northwards. The midday observation gave 80 degrees 20 minutes northeast, that is 9 minutes since the day before yesterday. Strange, a north wind of 4 whole days took us to the south, while 24 hours of this scanty wind drifts us 9 minutes northwards. This is remarkable. It looks as if we were done with drifting southwards. And when, in addition to this, I take into consideration the striking warmth of the water deep down, it seems to me that things are really looking brighter. The reasoning runs as follows. The temperature of the water in the East Greenland current, even on the surface, is nowhere over zero, the mean temperature for the year, and appears generally to be -1 degree Celsius, 30.2 degrees Fahrenheit, even in 70 degrees north latitude. In this latitude the temperature steadily falls as you get below the surface. Nowhere at a greater depth than 100 fathoms is it above -1 degree Celsius, and generally from -1.5 degrees, 29.30 degrees Fahrenheit, to -1.7 degrees Celsius, 28.94 degrees Fahrenheit, right to the bottom. Moreover, the bottom temperature of the whole sea north of the 60th degree of latitude is under -1 degree Celsius. A strip along the Norwegian coast and between Norway and Spitzbergen alone excepted, but here the temperature is over -1 degree Celsius, from 86 fathoms, 160 meters downward, and 135 fathoms, 250 meters, the temperature is already plus 0.55 degrees Celsius, 32.99 degrees Fahrenheit, and that too, be it remarked, north of the 80th degree of latitude, and in a sea surrounding the pole of maximum cold. This warm water can hardly come from the Arctic Sea itself, while the current issuing thence towards the south has a general temperature of about -1.5 degrees Celsius. It can hardly be anything other than the Gulf Stream that finds its way hither, and replaces the water which in its upper layers flows towards the north, forming the sources of the East Greenland polar current. All this seems to chime in with my previous assumptions, and supports the theory on which this expedition was planned. And when, in addition to this, one bears in mind that the winds seem, as anticipated, to be as a rule southeasterly, as was moreover the case at the international station at Sagaster by the Lennemouth, our prospects do not appear to be unfavorable. Frequently, moreover, I thought I could detect unmistakable symptoms of a steadily flowing northwesterly current under the ice, and then, of course, my spirits rose. But at other times, when the drift again bore southwards, and that was often, my doubts would return, and it seemed as if there was no prospect of getting through within any reasonable time. Truly, such drifting in the ice is extremely trying to the mind, but there is one virtue it fosters, and that is patience. The whole expedition was in reality one long course of training in this useful virtue. Our progress as the spring advanced grew somewhat better than it had been during the winter, but on the whole it was always the same sort of crab-like locomotion, for each time we made a long stretch to the north, a longer period of reaction was sure to follow. It was, in the opinion of one of our number, who was somewhat of a politician, a constant struggle between the left and right, between progressionists and recessionists. After a period of left wind and a glorious drift northwards, as a matter of course, the radical right took the helm, and we remained lying in dead water or drifted backwards, thereby putting Amundsen into a very bad temper. It was a remarkable fact that during the whole time the Fram's bow turned towards the south, generally south 1/4 west, and shifted but very little during the whole drift. As I say on May 14th, she went backwards towards her goal in the north with her nose ever turned to the south. It is as though she shrank from increasing her distance from the world, as though she were longing for southern shores, while some invisible power is drawing her on towards the unknown. Can it be an ill omen, this backward advance towards the interior of the Polar Sea? I cannot think it. Even the crab ultimately reaches its goal. A statement of our latitude and longitude on different days will best indicate the general course of our drift. May 1st, 80 degrees 46 minutes north latitude. May 4th, 80 degrees 50 minutes. May 6th, 80 degrees 49 minutes. May 8th, 80 degrees 55 minutes north latitude, 129 degrees 58 minutes east longitude. May 12th, 80 degrees 52 minutes north latitude. May 15th, 129 degrees 20 minutes east longitude. May 21st, 81 degrees 20 minutes north latitude, 125 degrees 45 minutes east longitude. May 23rd, 81 degrees 26 minutes north latitude. May 27th, 81 degrees 31 minutes. June 2nd, 81 degrees 31 minutes north latitude, 121 degrees 47 minutes east longitude. June 13th, 81 degrees 46 minutes. June 18th, 81 degrees 52 minutes. Up to this we had made fairly satisfactory progress towards the north, but now came the reaction. June 24th, 81 degrees 42 minutes. July 1st, 81 degrees 33 minutes. July 10th, 81 degrees 20 minutes. July 14th, 81 degrees 32 minutes. July 18th, 81 degrees 26 minutes. July 31st, 81 degrees 2 minutes north latitude, 126 degrees 5 minutes 5 seconds east longitude. August 8th, 81 degrees 8 minutes. August 14th, 81 degrees 5 minutes north latitude, 127 degrees 38 minutes east longitude. August 26th, 81 degrees 1 minute. September 5th, 81 degrees 14 minutes north latitude, 123 degrees 36 minutes east longitude. After this we began once more to drift northwards, but not very fast. As before, we were constantly on the lookout for land, and were inclined first from one thing, then from another, to think we saw signs of its proximity, but they always turned out to be imaginary, and the great depth of the sea, moreover, showed that at all events land could not be near. Later on August 7th, when I had found over 2,085 fathoms, 3,850 meters depth, I say in my diary, "I do not think we shall talk any more about the shallow Polar Sea, where land may be expected anywhere. We may very possibly drift out into the Atlantic Ocean without having seen a single mountain top, an eventful series of years to look forward to." The plan already alluded to of travelling over the ice with dogs and sledges occupied me a good deal. and during my daily expeditions, partly on snowshoes, partly with dogs, my attention was constantly given to the condition of the ice and our prospects of being able to make our way over it. During April it was specially well adapted for using dogs. The surface was good, as the sun's power had made it smoother than the heavy drift snow earlier in the winter. Besides, the wind had covered the pressure ridges pretty evenly, and there were not many crevasses or channels in the ice, so that one could proceed for miles without much trouble from them. In May, however, a change set in. So early as May 8th the wind had broken up the ice a good deal, and now there were lanes in all directions, which proved a great obstacle when I went out driving with the dogs. The temperature, however, was still so low that the channels were quickly frozen over again and became passable. But later on in the month the temperature rose, so that ice was no longer so readily formed on the water, and the channels became ever more and more numerous. On May 20th I write, "Went out on snowshoes in the forenoon. The ice has been very much broken up in various directions, owing to the continual winds during the last week. The lanes are difficult to cross over, as they are full of small pieces of ice that lie dispersed about and are partly covered with drift snow. This is very deceptive, for one may seem to have firm ice under one at places where, on sticking one's staff in, it goes right down without any sign of ice. On many occasions I nearly got into trouble in crossing over snow like this on snowshoes. I would suddenly find that the snow was giving way under me, and would manage with no little difficulty to get safely back onto firm ice." On June 5th the ice and the snow surface were about as before. I write, "Have just been out on a snowshoe excursion with Sverdrup in a southerly direction, the first for a long while. The condition of the ice has altered, but not for the better. The surface indeed is hard and good, but the pressure ridges are very awkward, and there are crevasses and hummocks in all directions. A sledge expedition would make poor enough progress on such ice as this." Hitherto, however, progress had always been possible, but now the snow began to melt, and placed almost insuperable difficulties in the way. On June 13th I write, "The ice gets softer and softer every day, and large pools of water are formed on the floes all around us. In short, the surface is abominable. The snowshoes break through into the water everywhere. Truly one would not be able to get far in a day now, should one be obliged to set off towards the south or west. It is as if every outlet were blocked, and here we stick. Sometimes it strikes me as rather remarkable that none of our fellows have become alarmed, even when we are bearing farther and farther northwards, farther and farther into the unknown. But there is no sign of fear in any one of them. All look gloomy when we are bearing south or too much to the west, and all are beaming with joy when we are drifting to the northward, the farther the better. Yet none of them can be blind to the fact that it is a matter of life and death, if anything of what nearly every one prophesied should now occur. Should the ship be crushed in this ice and go to the bottom, like the Jeannette, without our being able to save sufficient supplies to continue our drift on the ice, we should have to turn our course to the south, and then there would be little doubt as to our fate. The Jeannette people fared badly enough, but their ship went down in 77° north latitude, while the nearest land to us is many times more than double the distance it was in their case, to say nothing of the nearest inhabited land. We are now more than 70 miles from Cape Chelyuskin, while from there to any inhabited region we are a long way farther. But the Fram will not be crushed, and nobody believes in the possibility of such an event. We are like the kayak rower, who knows well enough that one faulty stroke of his paddle is enough to capsize him and send him into eternity. But none the less he goes on his way serenely, for he knows that he will not make a faulty stroke. This is absolutely the most comfortable way of undertaking a polar expedition. What possible journey, indeed, could be more comfortable? Not even a railway journey, for then you have the bother of changing carriages. Still, a change now and then would be no bad thing. Later on in July the surface was even worse. The floes were everywhere covered with slush, with water underneath, and on the pressure ridges and between the hummocks where the snowdrifts were deep, one would often sink in up to the middle, not even the snowshoes bearing one up in this soft snow. Later on in July matters improved, the snow having gradually melted away, so that there was a firmer surface of ice to go on. But large pools of water now formed on the ice floes. Already on the 8th and 9th of June such a pool had begun to appear round the ship, so that she lay in a little lake of fresh water, and we were obliged to make use of a bridge in order to reach a dry spot on the ice. Some of these freshwater pools were of respectable dimensions and depth. There was one of these on the starboard side of the ship, so large that in the middle of July we could row and sail on it with the boats. This was a favorite evening amusement with some of us, and the boat was fully officered with captain, mate, and second mate, but had no common sailors. They thought it an excellent opportunity of practicing sailing with a square sail, while the rest of our fellows standing on the icy shore found it still more diverting to bombard the navigators with snowballs and lumps of ice. It was in this same pool that we tried one day if one of our boats could carry all 13 of us at once. When the dogs saw us all leave the ship to go to the pool, they followed us in utter bewilderment as to what this unusual movement could mean. But when we got into the boat, they, all of them, set to work and howled in wild despair, thinking probably that they would never see us again. Some of them swam after us, while 2 cunning ones, Pan and Kvik, conceived the brilliant idea of galloping round the pool to the opposite side to meet us. A few days afterwards I was dismayed to find the pool dried up. A hole had been worn through the ice at the bottom, and all the fresh water had drained out into the sea. So that amusement came to an end. In the summer, when we wanted to make an excursion over the ice, in addition to such pools, we met with lanes in the ice in all directions, but as a rule could easily cross them by jumping from one loose floe to another, or leaping right across at narrow places. These lanes never attained any great width, and there was consequently no question of getting the Fram afloat in any of them. And even could we have done so, it would have been of very little avail, as none of them was large enough to have taken her more than a few cable lengths further north. Sometimes there were indications in the sky that there must be large stretches of open water in our vicinity, and we could now and then see from the crow's nest large spaces of clear water in the horizon. But they could not have been large enough to be of much use when it came to a question of pushing forward with a ship. Sanguine folk on board, however, attached more importance to such open stretches. June 15th I wrote in my diary, "There are several lanes visible in different directions, but none of them is wide or of any great extent. The mate, however, is always insisting that we shall certainly get open water before autumn and be able to creep along northwards, while with the rest, Sverdrup excepted, it seems to be a generally accepted belief. Where they are to get their open water from I do not know. For the rest, this is the first icebound expedition that has not spent the summer spying after open water and sighing and longing for the ice to disperse. I only wish it may keep together and hurry up and drift northwards. Everything in this life depends on what one has made up one's mind to. One person sets forth to sail in open water, perhaps to the very pole, but gets stuck in the ice and laments. Another is prepared to get stuck in the ice, but will not grumble even should he find open water. It is ever the safest plan to expect the least of life, for then one often gets the most." The open spaces, the lanes, and the rifts in the ice are, of course, produced, like the pressure and packing, by the shifting winds and the tidal currents that set the ice drifting first in one direction, then in another. And they best prove, perhaps, how the surface of the polar sea must be considered as one continuous mass of ice floes in constant motion, now frozen together, now torn apart, or crushed against each other. During the whole of our drift I paid great attention to this ice, not only with respect to its motion, but to its formation and growth as well. In the introduction of this book I have pointed out that even should the ice pass year after year in the cold polar sea, it could not by mere freezing attain more than a certain thickness. From measurements that were constantly being made, it appeared that the ice which was formed during the autumn in October or November continued to increase in size during the whole of the winter and out into the spring, but more slowly the thicker it became. On April 10th it was about 2.31 meters, April 21st 2.41 meters, May 5th 2.45 meters, May 31st 2.52 meters, June 9th 2.58 meters. It was thus continually increasing in bulk, notwithstanding that the snow now melted quickly on the surface, and large pools of fresh water were formed on the floes. On June 20th the thickness was the same, although the melting on the surface had now increased considerably. On July 4th the thickness was 2.57 meters. On July 10th I was amazed to find that the ice had increased to 2.76 meters, notwithstanding that it would now diminish several centimeters daily from surface melting. I bored in many places, but found it everywhere the same. A thin, somewhat loose ice mass lay under the old floe. I first thought it was a thin ice floe that had got pushed under, but subsequently discovered that it was actually a new formation of fresh-water ice on the lower side of the old ice, due to the layer of fresh water of about 9 feet 9 inches (3 meters) in depth, formed by the melting of the snow on the ice. Owing to its lightness, this warm fresh water floated on the salt sea water, which was at a temperature of about -1.5 degrees Celsius on its surface. Thus, by contact with the colder sea water, the fresh water became cooler, and so a thick crust of ice was formed on the fresh water, where it came in contact with the salt water lying underneath it. It was this ice crust, then, that augmented the thickness of the ice on its underside. Later on in the summer, however, the ice diminished somewhat owing to melting on the surface. On July 23rd the old ice was only 2.33 meters, and with the newly formed layer 2.49 meters. On August 10th the thickness of the old ice had decreased to 1.94 meters, and together the aggregate thickness to 3.17 meters. On August 22nd the old ice was 1.86 meters, and the aggregate thickness 3.06 meters. On September 3rd the aggregate thickness was 2.02 meters, and on September 30th 1.98 meters. On October 3rd it was the same. The thickness of the old ice was then 1.75 meters. On October 12th the aggregate thickness was 2.08 meters, while the old ice was 1.8 meters. On November 10th it was still about the same, with only a slight tendency to increase. Further on, in November and in December, it increased quite slowly. On December 11th the aggregate thickness reached 2.11 meters. On January 3rd, 1895, 2.32 meters. January 10th, 2.48 meters. February 6th, 2.59 meters. Hence it will be seen that the ice does not attain any enormous thickness by direct freezing. The packing caused by pressure can, however, produce blocks and floes of a very different size. It often happens that the floes get shoved in under each other in several layers and are frozen together, so as to appear like one originally continuous mass of ice. Thus the Fram had got a good bed under her. Juel and Peter had often disputed together during the winter as to the thickness of ice the Fram had under her. Peter, who had seen a good deal of the ice before, maintained that it must at least be 20 feet thick, while Juel would not believe it, and betted 20 kroner that it was not as thick as that. On April 19th this dispute again broke out, and I say of it in my diary, "Juel has undertaken to make a bore, but unfortunately our bore reaches no farther than 16 feet down. Peter, however, has undertaken to cut away the 4 feet that are lacking. There has been a lot of talk about this wager during the whole winter, but they could never agree about it. Peter says that Juel should begin to bore, while Juel maintains that Peter ought to cut the 4 feet first. This evening it ended in Juel incautiously offering 10 kroner to anyone who would bore. Bentzen took him at his word and immediately set to work at it with Amundsen. He thought one did not always have the chance of earning 10 kroner so easily. Amundsen offered him a kroner an hour, or else payment per foot, and time payment was finally agreed to. They worked till late on into the night, and when they had got down 12 feet, the bores slipped a little way, and water rose in the hole, but this did not come to much, and presently the borer struck on ice again. They went on for some time, but now the borer would reach no further, and Peter had to be called up to cut his 4 feet. He and Amundsen worked away at cutting till they were dripping with perspiration. Amundsen, as usual, was very eager, and vowed he would not give in till he had got through it, even if it were 30 feet thick. Meanwhile Bentzen had turned in, but a message was sent to him to say that the hole was cut, and that boring could now begin again. When it was only an inch or an inch and a half short of 20 feet, the borers slipped through, and the water spurted up and filled the hole. They now sank a lead line down it, and at 30 feet it again brought up against ice. Now they were obliged to give it up. A fine lump of ice we are lying on. Not taking into account a large loose ice floe that is lying packed up on the ice, it is 16 inches above the water, and adding to this the 2 feet which the Fram is raised up above the ice, there is no small distance between her and the water. The temperature on the ice in summer is about thawing point, but gradually as the winter cold comes on, it of course falls rapidly on the surface, whence the cold slowly penetrates deeper and deeper down towards the lower surface, where it naturally keeps at an even temperature with the underlying water. Observations of the temperature of the ice in its different layers were constantly taken in order to ascertain how quickly this cooling down process of the ice took place during the winter, and also how the temperature rose again towards spring. The lowest temperature of the ice occurred in March and the beginning of April, when at 1.2 meters it was about 3.2 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 16 degrees Celsius, and at 0.8 meter about 22 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, minus 30 degrees Celsius. After the beginning of April, it began to rise slowly. At these low temperatures the ice became very hard and brittle, and was readily cracked or broken up by a blow or by packing. In the summer, on the other hand, when its temperature was near melting point, the ice became tough and plastic, and was not so readily broken up under packing. This difference between the condition of the ice in summer and winter was apparent also to the ear, as the ice packing in winter was always accompanied by the frequently mentioned loud noises, while the packing of the tough summer ice was almost noiseless, so that the most violent convulsions might take place close to us without our noticing them. In the immediate vicinity of the Fram, the ice remained perfectly at rest the whole year through, and she was not at this time exposed to any great amount of pressure. She lay safe and secure on the ice floe to which she was firmly frozen, and gradually, as the surface of the ice thawed under the summer sun, she rose up higher and higher. In the autumn she again began to sink a little, either because the ice gave way under her weight, or because it melted somewhat on the under surface, so that it no longer had so much buoyancy as before. Meanwhile life on board went on in its usual way. Now that we had daylight, there was of course more work of various descriptions on the ice than had been the case during the winter. I have already alluded more than once to our unsuccessful endeavors to reach the bottom by sounding. Unfortunately, we were not prepared for such great depths, and had not brought any deep-sea sounding apparatus with us. We had therefore to do the best we could under the circumstances, and that was to sacrifice one of the ship's steel cables in order to make a lead line. It was not difficult to find sufficient space on the ice for a rope walk, and although a temperature of from 22 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, -30 degrees Celsius, to 40 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, -40 degrees Celsius, is not the pleasantest in which to manipulate such things as steel wire, yet for all that the work went on well. The cable was unlaid into its separate strands, and a fresh pliant lead line manufactured by twisting two of these strands together. In this way we made a line of between 4,000 and 5,000 meters, 2,150 to 2,700 fathoms long, and could now at last reach the bottom. The depth proved to range between 3,300 and 3,900 meters, 1,800 to 2,100 fathoms. This was a remarkable discovery, for as I have frequently mentioned, the unknown polar basin has always been supposed to be shallow, with numerous unknown lands and islands. I too had assumed it to be shallow when I sketched out my plan, see page 24, and had thought it was traversed by a deep channel, which might possibly be a continuation of the deep channel in the North Atlantic, see page 28. From this assumption of a shallow polar sea, it was concluded that the regions about the pole had formerly been covered with an extensive tract of land, of which the existing islands are simply the remains. This extensive tract of polar land was furthermore assumed to have been the nursery of many of our animal and plant forms, whence they had found their way to lower latitudes. These conjectures now appear to rest on a somewhat infirm basis. This great depth indicates that here, at all events, there has not been land in any very recent geological period, and this depth is, no doubt, as old as the depth of the Atlantic Ocean, of which it is almost certainly a part. Another task to which I attached great importance, and to which I have frequently alluded, was the observation of the temperature of the sea at different depths, from the surface down to the bottom. These observations we took as often as time permitted, and as already mentioned, they gave some surprising results, showing the existence of warmer water below the cold surface stratum. This is not the place to give the results of the different measurements, but as they are all very similar, I will instance one of them in order that an idea may be formed how the temperature is distributed. This series of temperatures, of which an extract is given here, was taken from the 13th to the 17th of August. Table of temperatures, depths column, temperature column. Depths and temperature follow. Surface 0 fathoms, plus 1.02 degrees centigrade, 33.83 Fahrenheit. 2 meters, 1 fathom, minus 1.32 degrees centigrade, 29.62 Fahrenheit. 20 meters, 10 fathoms, minus 1.33 degrees centigrade, 29.61 Fahrenheit. 40 meters, 21 fathoms, minus 1.50 degrees centigrade, 29.3 Fahrenheit. 60 meters, 32 fathoms, minus 1.50 degrees centigrade, 29.3 Fahrenheit. 80 meters, 43 fathoms, minus 1.50 degrees centigrade, 29.3 Fahrenheit. 100 meters, 54 fathoms, minus 1.4 degrees centigrade, 29.48 Fahrenheit. 120 meters, 65 fathoms, minus 1.24 degrees centigrade, 29.77 Fahrenheit. 140 meters, 76 fathoms, minus 0.97 degrees centigrade, 30.254 Fahrenheit. 160 meters, 87 fathoms, minus 0.58 degrees centigrade, 30.96 Fahrenheit. 180 meters, 98 fathoms, minus 0.31 degrees centigrade, 31.44 Fahrenheit. 200 meters, 109 fathoms, minus 0.03 degrees centigrade, 31.95 Fahrenheit. 220 meters, 120 fathoms, plus 0.19 degrees centigrade, 32.34 Fahrenheit. 240 meters, 131 fathoms, plus 0.20 degrees centigrade, 32.36 Fahrenheit. 260 meters, 142 fathoms, plus 0.34 degrees centigrade, 32.61 Fahrenheit. 280 meters, 153 fathoms, plus 0.42 degrees centigrade, 32.76 Fahrenheit. 300 meters, 164 fathoms, plus 0.34 degrees centigrade, 32.61 Fahrenheit. 350 meters, 191 fathoms, plus 0.44 degrees centigrade, 32.79 Fahrenheit. 400 meters, 218 fathoms, plus 0.35 degrees centigrade, 32.63 Fahrenheit. 450 meters, 246 fathoms, plus 0.36 degrees centigrade, 32.66 Fahrenheit. 500 meters, 273 fathoms, plus 0.34 degrees centigrade, 32.61 Fahrenheit. 600 meters, 328 fathoms, plus 0.26 degrees centigrade, 32.47 Fahrenheit. 700 meters, 382 fathoms, plus 0.14 degrees centigrade, 32.25 Fahrenheit. 800 meters, 437 fathoms, plus 0.07 degrees centigrade, 32.126 Fahrenheit. 900 meters, 492 fathoms, minus 0.04 degrees centigrade, 31.928 Fahrenheit. 1,000 meters, 546 fathoms, minus 0.10 degrees centigrade, 31.82 Fahrenheit. 1,200 meters, 656 fathoms, minus 0.28 degrees centigrade, 31.496 Fahrenheit. 1,400 meters, 765 fathoms, minus 0.34 degrees centigrade, 31.39 Fahrenheit. 1,600 meters, 874 fathoms, minus 0.46 degrees centigrade, 31.17 Fahrenheit. 1,800 meters, 984 fathoms, minus 0.60 degrees centigrade, 39.92 Fahrenheit. 2,000 meters, 1,093 fathoms, minus 0.66 degrees centigrade, 30.81 Fahrenheit. 2,600 meters, 1,421 fathoms, minus 0.74 degrees centigrade, 30.67 Fahrenheit. 2,900 meters, 1,585 fathoms, minus 0.76 degrees centigrade, 30.63 Fahrenheit. 3,000 meters, 1,640 fathoms, minus 0.73 degrees centigrade, 30.69 Fahrenheit. 3,400 meters, 1,859 fathoms, minus 0.69 degrees centigrade, 30.76 Fahrenheit. 3,700 meters, 2,023 fathoms, minus 0.65 degrees centigrade, 30.83 Fahrenheit. 3,800 meters, 2,077 fathoms, minus 0.64 degrees centigrade, 30.85 Fahrenheit. 325 meters, 177 fathoms, plus 0.49 degrees centigrade, 32.88 Fahrenheit. Plus 0.85 degrees centigrade, 33.53 Fahrenheit. Plus 0.76 degrees centigrade, 33.37 Fahrenheit. Plus 0.78 degrees centigrade, 33.40 Fahrenheit. Plus 0.62 degrees centigrade, 33.12 Fahrenheit. These temperatures of the water are in many respects remarkable. In the first place, the temperature falls, as will be seen, from the surface downwards to a depth of 80 meters, after which it rises to 280 meters, falls again at 300 meters, then rises again at 326 meters, where it was plus 0.49 degrees. Then falls to rise again at 450 meters, then falls steadily down to 2,000 meters, to rise once more slowly at the bottom. Similar risings and fallings were to be found in almost all the series of temperatures taken, and the variations from one month to another were so small that at the respective depths they often merely amounted to the 200th part of a degree. Occasionally the temperature of the warm strata mounted even higher than mentioned here. Thus on October 17th at 300 meters it was plus 0.85 degrees, at 350 meters plus 0.76 degrees, at 400 meters plus 0.78, and at 500 meters plus 0.62 degrees, after which it sank evenly until, towards the bottom, it again rose as before. We had not expected to meet with much bird life in these desolate regions. Our surprise, therefore, was not small when on Whitsunday, May 13th, a gull paid us a visit. After that date we regularly saw birds of different kinds in our vicinity, till at last it became a daily occurrence, to which we did not pay any particular attention. For the most part they were ice mews, Larus eburneus, kittiwakes, Risa tridactyla, fulmars, Procellaria glacialis, and now and then a blue gull, L. glaucus, a herring gull, L. argentatus, or a black guillemot, Uriah grill. Once or twice we saw a squaw, probably Lestris parasitica, for instance, on July 14th. On July 21st we had a visit from a snow bunting. On August 3rd a remarkable occurrence took place. We were visited by the Arctic rose gull, Rhodostethia rosea. I wrote as follows about it in my diary. Today my longing has at last been satisfied. I have shot Ross's gull, 3 specimens in one day. This rare and mysterious inhabitant of the unknown north, which is only occasionally seen, and of which no one knows whence it cometh or whither it goeth, which belongs exclusively to the world to which the imagination aspires, is what, from the first moment I saw these tracts, I had always hoped to discover, as my eyes roamed over the lonely plains of ice. And now it came when I was least thinking of it. I was out for a little walk on the ice by the ship, and as I was sitting down by a hummock, my eyes wandered northwards and lit on a bird hovering over the great pressure mound away to the northwest. At first I took it to be a kittiwake, but soon discovered it rather resembled the squaw by its swift flight, sharp wings, and pointed tail. When I had got my gun, there were two of them together flying round and round the ship. I now got a closer view of them and discovered that they were too light-colored to be squaws. They were by no means shy, but continued flying about close to the ship. On going after them on the ice, I soon shot one of them, and was not a little surprised on picking it up to find it was a little bird about the size of a snipe. The mottled back, too, reminded me also of that bird. Soon after this I shot the other. Later in the day there came another which was also shot. On picking this one up I found it was not quite dead, and it vomited up a couple of large shrimps, which it must have caught in some channel or other. All three were young birds, about 12 inches in length, with dark mottled gray plumage on the back and wings, the breast and underside white, with a scarcely perceptible tinge of orange-red, and round the neck a dark ring sprinkled with gray. At a somewhat later age this mottled plumage disappears. They then become blue on the back, with a black ring round the neck, while the breast assumes a delicate pink hue. Some few days afterwards, August 6th and 8th, some more of these birds were shot, making 8 specimens in all. End of File 15. File number 16 of Farthest North, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskedahl. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 1. Chapter 7. The Spring and Summer of 1894, Part 2. While time was passing on, the plan I had been revolving in my mind during the winter was ever uppermost in my thoughts. The plan, that is to say, of exploring the unknown sea apart from the track in which the Fram was drifting. I kept an anxious eye upon the dogs, for fear anything should happen to them, and also to see that they continued in good condition, for all my hopes centered in them. Several of them, indeed, had been bitten to death, and 2 had been killed by bears, but there were still 26 remaining, and as a set-off against our losses we had the puppies, 8 of which had been permitted to live. As spring advanced they were allowed to roam the deck, but on May 5th their world was considerably extended. I wrote thus: In the afternoon we let the puppies loose on the ice, and Kvik at once took long expeditions with them to familiarize them with their surroundings. First she introduced them to our meteorological apparatus, then to the bear trap, and after that to different pressure mounds. They were very cautious at first, staring timidly all around, and venturing out very slowly, a step at a time from the ship's side, but soon they began to run riot in their newly discovered world. Kvik was very proud to conduct her litter out into the world, and roamed about in the highest of spirits, though she had only just returned from a long driving expedition, in which, as usual, she had done good work in harness. In the afternoon one of the black and white puppies had an attack of madness. It ran round the ship, barking furiously. The others set on it, and it bit at everything that came in its way. At last we got it shut in on the deck forward, where it was furious for a while, then quieted down, and now seems to be all right again. This makes the 4th that has had a similar attack. What can it possibly be? It cannot be hydrophobia, or it would have appeared among the grown-up dogs. Can it be toothache, or hereditary epilepsy, or some other infernal thing? Unfortunately, several of them died from these strange attacks. The puppies were such fine, nice animals that we were all very sorry when a thing like this occurred. On June 3rd, I write, another of the puppies died in the forenoon from one of those mysterious attacks, and I cannot conceal from myself that I take it greatly to heart and feel low-spirited about it. I have been so used to these small polar creatures living their sorrowless life on deck, romping and playing around us from morning to evening and a little bit of the night as well. I can watch them with pleasure by the hour together, or play with them as little children, have a game at hide-and-seek with them round the skylight while they are beside themselves with glee. It is the largest and strongest of the lot that has just died, a handsome dog. I called him Löwe, lion. He was such a confiding, gentle animal, and so affectionate. Only yesterday he was jumping and playing about and rubbing himself against me, and today he is dead. Our ranks are thinning, and the worst of it is we try in vain to make out what it is that ails them. This one was apparently quite in his normal condition and as cheerful as ever until his breakfast was given him. Then he began to cry and tear round, yelping and barking as if distracted, just as the others had done. After this, convulsions set in, and the froth poured from his mouth. One of these convulsions no doubt carried him off. Blessing and I held a post-mortem upon him in the afternoon, but we could discover no signs of anything unusual. It does not seem to be an infectious ailment. I cannot understand it. Ulenka, too, the handsomest dog in the whole pack, our consolation and our hope, suddenly became ill the other day. It was the morning of May 24th that we found it paralyzed and quite helpless, lying in its cask on deck. It kept trying to get up, but couldn't, and immediately fell down again, just like a man who has had a stroke and has lost all power over his limbs. It was at once put to bed in a box and nursed most carefully. Except for being unable to walk, it is apparently quite well. It must have been a kind of apoplectic seizure that attacked the spinal cord in some spot or other and paralyzed one side of the body. The dog recovered slowly, but never got the complete use of its legs again. It accompanied us, however, on our subsequent sledge expedition. The dogs did not seem to like the summer. It was so wet on the ice and so warm. On June 11th I write, "Today the pools on the ice all round us have increased wonderfully in size, and it is by no means agreeable to go off the ship with shoes that are not watertight. It is wetter and wetter for the dogs in the daytime, and they sweat more and more from the heat, though it as yet only rarely rises above zero. A few days ago they were shifted on to the ice, where 2 long kennels were set up for them. They were made out of boxes, and really consist of only a wall and a roof. Here they spend the greater part of the 24 hours, and we are now rid of all uncleanliness on board, except for the 4 puppies which still remain, and lead a glorious life of it up there between sleep and play. Ulenka is still on deck, and is slowly recovering. There is the same daily routine for the dogs as in the winter. We let them loose in the morning about 8:30, and as the time for their release draws near they begin to get very impatient. Every time anyone shows himself on deck, a wild chorus of howls issues from 26 throats, clamoring for food and freedom. After being let loose they get their breakfast, consisting of half a dried fish or 3 biscuits apiece. The rest of the forenoon is spent in rooting round among all the refuse heaps they can find, and they gnaw and lick all the empty tin cases, which they have ransacked hundreds of times before. If the cook sends a fresh tin dancing along the ice, a battle immediately rages around the prize. It often happens that one or another of them, trying to get at a tempting piece of fat at the bottom of a deep, narrow tin, sticks his head so far down into it that the tin sits fast, and he cannot release himself again. So with this extinguisher on his head he sprawls about blindly over the ice, indulging in the most wonderful antics in the effort to get rid of it, to the great amusement of us, the spectators. When tired of their work at the rubbish heaps, they stretch out their round, sausage-like bodies, panting in the sun, if there is any, and if it is too warm, they get into the shade. They are tied up again before dinner, but Pan and others like-minded sneak away a little before that time and hide up behind a hummock, so that one can see only a head or an ear sticking up here and there. Should anyone go to fetch him in, he will probably growl, show his teeth, or even snap, after which he will lie flat down and allow himself to be dragged off to prison. The remainder of the 24 hours they spend sleeping, puffing, and panting in the excessive heat, which, by the way, is 2 degrees of cold. Every now and then they set up a chorus of howls that certainly must be heard in Siberia, and quarrel amongst themselves till the fur flies in all directions. This removal of the dogs onto the ice has imposed upon the watch the arduous duty of remaining on deck at nights, which was not the practice before. But a bear having once been on board and taken off 2 of our precious animals, we don't want any more such visitors. On July 31st, Kvik again increased our population by bringing 11 puppies into the world, one of which was deformed and was at once killed. 2 others died later, but most of them grew up and became fine, handsome animals. They are still living. Few or no incidents occurred during this time, except, naturally, the different red-letter days were celebrated with great ceremony. May 17th we observed with special pomp, the following description of which I find in my journal. Friday, May 18th. May 17th was celebrated yesterday with all possible festivity. In the morning we were awakened with organ music, the enlivening strains of the college hornpipe. After this a splendid breakfast off smoked salmon, ox tongues, etc., etc. The whole ship's company wore bows of ribbon in honor of the day. Even old Suggen had one round his tail. The wind whistled, and the Norwegian flag floated on high, fluttering bravely at the masthead. About 11 o'clock the company assembled with their banners on the ice on the port side of the ship, and the procession arranged itself in order. First of all came the leader of the expedition with the pure Norwegian flag. After him Sverdrup with the Fram's pennant, which with its Fram on a red background, 3 fathoms long, looked splendid. Next came a dog sledge with the band, Johansen with the accordion, and Mogstad as coachman. After them came the mate with rifles and harpoons, Henriksen carrying a long harpoon, then Amundsen and Nordahl with a red banner. The doctor followed with a demonstration flag in favor of a normal working day. It consisted of a woolen jersey with the letters N.A. embroidered on the breast, and at the top of a very long pole it looked most impressive. After him followed our chef, Juel, with Peake's saucepan on his back. And then came the meteorologists, with a curious apparatus consisting of a large tin scutcheon, across which was fastened a red band with the letters ALST, signifying Almindeleg Stemmerett, or universal suffrage. At last the procession began to move on. The dogs marched demurely, as if they had never done anything else in all their lives than walk in procession, and the band played a magnificent festive march, not composed for the occasion. The stately cortege marched twice round the Fram, after which, with great solemnity, it moved off in the direction of the large hummock, and was photographed on the way by the photographer of the expedition. At the hummock a hearty cheer was given for the Fram, which had brought us hither so well, and which would doubtless take us equally well home again. After this the procession turned back, cutting across the Fram's bow. At the port gangway a halt was called, and the photographer, mounting the bridge, made a speech in honor of the day. This was succeeded by a thundering salute consisting of 6 shots, the result of which was that 5 or 6 of the dogs rushed off over hummocks and pressure ridges and hid themselves for several hours. Meanwhile we went down into the cozy cabin, decorated with flags for the occasion in a right festive manner, where we partook of a splendid dinner, preluded by a lovely valse. The menu was as follows: minced fish with curried lobster, melted butter and potatoes, music; pork cutlets with green peas, potatoes, mango chutney, and Worcester sauce, music; apricots and custard with cream, much music. After this a siesta, then coffee, currants, figs, cakes, and the photographer stood cigars. Great enthusiasm, then more siesta. After supper the violinist, Mogstad, gave a recital, when refreshments were served in the shape of figs, sweetmeats, apricots, and gingerbread honey cakes. On the whole, a charming and very successful 17th of May, especially considering that we had passed the 81st degree of latitude. Monday, May 28th. Ugh, I am tired of these endless white plains. Cannot even be bothered snowshoeing over them, not to mention that the lanes stop one on every hand. Day and night I pace up and down the deck, along the ice by the ship's sides, revolving the most elaborate scientific problems. For the past few days it is especially the shifting of the pole that has fascinated me. I am beset by the idea that the tidal wave, along with the unequal distribution of land and sea, must have a disturbing effect on the situation of the earth's axis. When such an idea gets into one's head, it is no easy matter to get it out again. After pondering over it for several days, I have finally discovered that the influence of the moon on the sea must be sufficient to cause a shifting of the pole to the extent of 1 minute in 800,000 years. In order to account for the European glacial age, which was my main object, I must shift the pole at least 10 or 20 degrees. This leaves an uncomfortably wide interval of time since that period, and shows that the human race must have attained a respectable age. Of course it is all nonsense, but while I am indefatigably tramping the deck in a brown study, imagining myself no end of a great thinker, I suddenly discover that my thoughts are at home, where all is summer and loveliness, and those I have left are busy building castles in the air for the day when I shall return. Yes, yes, I spend rather too much time on this sort of thing, but the drift goes as slowly as ever, and the wind, the all-powerful wind, is still the same. The first thing my eyes look for when I set foot on deck in the morning is the weathercock on the mizzen top, to see how the wind lies. Thither they are forever straying during the whole day, and there again they rest, the last thing before I turn in. But it ever points in the same direction, west and southwest, and we drift now quicker, now more slowly westwards, and only a little to the north. I have no doubt now about the success of the expedition, and my miscalculation was not so great after all, but I scarcely think we shall drift higher than 85 degrees, even if we do that. It will depend on how far Franz Josef Land extends to the north. In that case it will be hard to give up reaching the pole. It is in reality a mere matter of vanity, merely child's play, in comparison with what we are doing and hoping to do. And yet I must confess that I am foolish enough to want to take in the pole while I am about it, and shall probably have a try at it if we get into its neighborhood within any reasonable time. This is a mild May. The temperature has been about zero several times of late, and one can walk up and down and almost imagine one's self at home. There is seldom more than a few degrees of cold, but the summer fogs are beginning, with occasional hoarfrost. As a rule, however, the sky with its light, fleeting clouds is almost like a spring sky in the south. We notice, too, that it has become milder on board. We no longer need to light a fire in the stove to make ourselves warm and cozy, though indeed we have never indulged in much luxury in this respect. In the storeroom, the rime frost and ice that had settled on the ceiling and walls are beginning to melt, and in the compartments astern of the saloon and in the hold we have been obliged to set about a grand cleaning up, scraping off and sweeping away the ice and rime to save our provisions from taking harm through the damp penetrating the wrappings and rusting holes in the tin cases. We have, moreover, for a long time kept the hatchways in the hold open, so that there has been a thorough draught through it, and a good deal of the rime has evaporated. It is remarkable how little damp we have on board. No doubt this is due to the Fram's solid construction and to the deck over the hold being paneled on the underside. I am getting fonder and fonder of this ship. Saturday, June 9th. Our politician Amundsen is celebrating the day with a white shirt and collar. Today I have moved with my work up into the deck-house again, where I can sit and look out of the window in the daytime and feel that I am living in the world and not in a cavern, where one must have lamplight night and day. I intend remaining here as long as possible out into the winter. It is so cozy and quiet, and the monotonous surroundings are not constantly forcing themselves in upon me. I really have the feeling that summer has come. I can pace up and down the deck by the hour together with the sun, or stand still and roast myself in it while I smoke a pipe and my eyes glide over the confused masses of snow and ice. The snow is everywhere wet now, and pools are beginning to form every here and there. The ice, too, is getting more and more permeated with salt water. If one bores ever so small a hole in it, it is at once filled with water. The reason, of course, is that owing to the rise in the temperature, the particles of salt contained in the ice begin to melt their surroundings, and more water is formed with a good admixture of salt in it, so that its freezing point is lower than the temperature of the ice around it. This, too, had risen materially. At about 4 feet depth it is only 25.2 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 3.8 degrees Celsius. At 5 feet it is somewhat warmer again, 26.5 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 3.1 degrees Celsius. Sunday, June 10th. Oddly enough, we have had no cases of snow blindness on board, with the exception of the doctor, who a couple of days ago, after we had been playing at ball, got a touch of it in the evening. The tears poured from his eyes for some time, but he soon recovered. Rather a humiliating trick of fate that he should be the first to suffer from this ailment. Subsequently, we had a few isolated cases of slight snow blindness, so that 1 or 2 of our men had to go about with dark spectacles, but it was of little importance and was due to their not thinking it worth while to take the necessary precautions. Monday, June 11th. Today I made a joyful discovery. I thought I had begun my last bundle of cigars, and calculated that by smoking 1 a day they would last a month, but found quite unexpectedly a whole box in my locker. Great rejoicing! It will help to while away a few more months, and where shall we be then? Poor fellow, you are really at a low ebb. To while away time, that is an idea that has scarcely ever entered your head before. It has always been your great trouble that time flew away so fast, and now it cannot go fast enough to please you. And then, so addicted to tobacco, you wrap yourself in clouds of smoke to indulge in your everlasting daydreams. Hark to the south wind, how it whistles in the rigging. It is quite inspiriting to listen to it. On Midsummer Eve we ought, of course, to have had a bonfire as usual, but from my diary it does not seem to have been the sort of weather for it. Saturday, June 23rd, 1894. Mid the shady vales and the leafy trees, how sweet the approach of the summer breeze, when the mountain slopes in the sunlight gleam and the eve of St. John comes in like a dream. The north wind continues with sleet, gloomy weather, drifting south. 81 degrees 43 minutes north latitude, that is 9 minutes southward since Monday. I have seen many midsummer eves under different skies, but never such a one as this. So far, far from all that one associates with this evening. I think of the merriment round the bonfires at home, hear the scraping of the fiddle, the peals of laughter, and the salvos of the guns, with the echoes answering from the purple-tinted heights. And then I look out over this boundless white expanse into the fog and sleet and the driving wind. Here is truly no trace of midsummer merriment. It is a gloomy lookout altogether. Midsummer is past, and now the days are shortening again, and the long night of winter approaching, which maybe will find us as far advanced as it left us. I was busily engaged with my examination of the salinity of the sea-water this afternoon, when Mogstad stuck his head in at the door and said that a bear must be prowling about in the neighborhood. On returning after dinner to their work at the great hummock, where they were busy making an ice cellar for fresh meat, the men found bear tracks which were not there before. I put on my snowshoes and went after it. But what terrible going it had been the last few days! Soft slush in which the snowshoes sink helplessly. The bear had come from the west right up to the Fram, had stopped and inspected the work that was going on, had then retreated a little, made a considerable detour, and set off eastwards at its easy, shambling gait without deigning to pay any further attention to such a trifle as a ship. It had rummaged about in every hole and corner where there seemed to be any chance of finding food, and had rooted in the snow after anything the dogs had left, or whatever else it might be. It had then gone to the lanes in the ice and skirted them carefully, no doubt in the hope of finding a seal or two, and after that it had gone off between the hummocks and overflows, with a surface of nothing but slush and water. Had the surface been good, I should no doubt have overtaken Master Bruin, but he had too long a start in the slushy snow. A dismal, dispiriting landscape, nothing but white and gray. No shadows, merely half-obliterated forms melting into the fog and slush. Everything is in a state of disintegration, and one's foothold gives way at every step. It is hard work for the poor snowshoer who stamps along through the slush and fog after bear tracks that wind in and out among the hummocks or over them. The snowshoes sink deep in, and the water often reaches up to the ankles, so that it is hard work to get them up or to force them forward, but without them one would be still worse off. Every here and there this monotonous grayish whiteness is broken by the coal-black water, which winds in narrower or broader lanes in between the high hummocks. White snow-laden floes and lumps of ice float on the dark surface, looking like white marble on a black ground. Occasionally there is a larger dark-colored pool, where the wind gets a hold of the water and forms small waves that ripple and plash against the edge of the ice, the only signs of life in this desert tract. It is like an old friend, the sound of these playful wavelets, and here too they eat away the floes and hollow out their edges. One could almost imagine oneself in more southern latitudes. But all around is wreathed with ice, towering aloft in its ever-varying, fantastic forms, in striking contrast to the dark water on which a moment before the eye had rested. Everlastingly is this shifting ice modeling, as it were, in pure gray marble, and with nature's lavish prodigality strewing around the most glorious statuary which perishes without any eye having seen it. Wherefore? To what end all this shifting pageant of loveliness? It is governed by the mere caprices of nature, following out those everlasting laws that pay no heed to what we regard as aims and objects. In front of me towers one pressure ridge after another, with lane after lane between. It was in June the Jeanette was crushed and sank. What if the Fram were to meet her fate here? No, the ice will not get the better of her. Yet if it should, in spite of everything. As I stood gazing around me, I remembered it was Midsummer Eve. Far away yonder her masts pointed aloft, half lost to view in the snowy haze. They must indeed have stout hearts, those fellows on board that craft. Stout hearts, or else blind faith in a man's word. It is all very well that he who has hatched a plan, be it never so wild, should go with it to carry it out. He naturally does his best for the child to which his thoughts have given birth. But they had no child to tend, and could, without feeling any yearning, balked, have refrained from taking part in an expedition like this. Why should any human being renounce life to be wiped out here? Sunday, June 24th, the anniversary of our departure from home. Northerly wind, still drifting south. Observations today gave 81 degrees, 41 minutes, 7 seconds north latitude, so we are not going at breakneck speed. It has been a long year. A great deal has been gone through in it, though we are quite as far advanced as I had anticipated. I am sitting and look out of the window at the snow, whirling round in eddies as it is swept along by the north wind. A strange midsummer day. One might think we had had enough of snow and ice. I am not, however, exactly pining after green fields, at all events not always. On the contrary, I find myself sitting by the hour laying plans for other voyages into the ice after our return from this one. Yes, I know what I have attained, and more or less what awaits me. It is all very well for me to sketch plans for the future, but those at home— No, I am not in a humor for writing this evening. I will turn in. Wednesday, July 11th. Latitude 81 degrees, 18 minutes, 8 seconds. At last the southerly wind has returned, so there is an end of drifting south for the present. Now I am almost longing for the polar night, for the everlasting wonderland of the stars with the spectral northern lights and the moon sailing through the profound silence. It is like a dream, like a glimpse into the realms of fantasy. There are no forms, no cumbrous reality, only a vision woven of silver and violet ether, rising up from earth and floating out into infinity. But this eternal day, with its oppressive actuality, interests me no longer, does not entice me out of my lair. Life is one incessant hurrying from one task to another. Everything must be done and nothing neglected, day after day, week after week, and the working day is long, seldom ending till far over midnight. But through it all runs the same sensation of longing and emptiness, which must not be noted. Ah, but at times there is no holding it aloof, and the hands sink down without will or strength, so weary, so unutterably weary. Ah, life's peace is said to be found by holy men in the desert. Here indeed there is desert enough, but peace, of that I know nothing. I suppose it is the holiness that is lacking. Wednesday, July 18th. Went on excursion with Blessing in the forenoon to collect specimens of the brown snow and ice and gather seaweed and diatoms in the water. The upper surface of the floes is nearly everywhere of a dirty brown color, or at least this sort of ice preponderates, while pure white floes, without any traces of a dirty brown on their surface, are rare. I imagined this brown color must be due to the organisms I found in the newly frozen brownish-red ice last autumn, October, but the specimens I took today consist for the most part of mineral dust mingled with diatoms and other ingredients of organic origin. Blessing collected several specimens on the upper surface of the ice earlier in the summer and came to the same conclusions. I must look farther into this in order to see whether all this brown dust is of a mineral nature and consequently originates from the land. We found in the lanes quantities of algae like what we had often found previously. There were large accumulations of them in nearly every little channel. We could also see that a brown surface layer spread itself on the sides of the floes far down into the water. This is due to an algae that grows on the ice. There were also floating in the water a number of small viscid lumps, some white, some of a yellowish-red color, and of these I collected several. Under the microscope they all appeared to consist of accumulations of diatoms, among which, moreover, were a number of larger cellular organisms of a very characteristic appearance. All of these diatomous accumulations kept at a certain depth, about a yard below the surface of the water. In some of the small lanes they appeared in large masses. At the same depth The above-named algae seemed especially to flourish, while parts of it rose up to the surface. It was evident that these accumulations of diatoms and algae remained floating exactly at the depth where the upper stratum of fresh water rests on the sea water. The water on the surface was entirely fresh, and the masses of diatoms sank in it, but floated on reaching the salt water below. Thursday, July 19th. It is as I expected. I am beginning to know the ways of the wind up here pretty well now. After having blown a windmill breeze, today it falls calm in the evening, and tomorrow we shall probably have wind from the west or northwest. Yesterday evening, the last cigar out of the old box, and now I have smoked the first out of the last box I have got. We were to have got so far by the time that box was finished, but are scarcely any further advanced than when I began it, and goodness knows if we shall be that when this too has disappeared. But enough of that. Smoke away. Sunday, July 22nd. The northwest wind did not come quite up to time. On Friday we had northeast instead, and during the night it gradually went round to north-northeast, and yesterday forenoon it blew due north. Today it has ended in the west, the old well-known quarter of which we have had more than enough. This evening the line shows about northwest to north, and it is strong, so we are moving south again. I pass the day at the microscope. I am now busied with the diatoms and algae of all kinds that grow on the ice in the uppermost fresh stratum of the sea. These are undeniably most interesting things, a whole new world of organisms that are carried off by the ice from known shores across the unknown polar sea, there to awaken every summer and develop into life and bloom. Yes, it is very interesting work, but yet there is not that same burning interest as of old, although the scent of oil of cloves, Canada balsam, and wood oil awakens many dear reminiscences of that quiet laboratory at home, and every morning as I come in here the microscope and glasses and colors on the table invite me to work. But though I work indefatigably day after day till late in the night, it is mostly duty work, and I am not sorry when it is finished to go and lie for some few hours in my berth, reading a novel and smoking a cigar. With what exultation would I not throw the whole aside, spring up, and lay hold of real life, fighting my way over ice and sea with sledges, boats, or kayaks. It is more than true that it is easy to live a life of battle, but here there is neither storm nor battle, and I thirst after them. I long to enlist titanic forces and fight my way forward. That would be living. But what pleasure is there in strength when there is nothing for it to do? Here we drift forward, and here we drift back, and now we have been 2 months on the same spot. Everything, however, is being got ready for a possible expedition, or for the contingency of its becoming necessary to abandon the ship. All the hand sledges are lashed together, and the iron fittings carefully seen to. 6 dog sledges are also being made, and tomorrow we shall begin building kayaks ready for the men. They are easy to draw on hand sledges in case of a retreat over the ice without the ship. For a beginning we are making kayaks to hold 2 men each. I intend to have them about 12 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 18 inches in depth. 6 of these are to be made. They are to be covered with sealskin or sailcloth, and to be decked all over except for 2 holes, one for each man. I feel that we have, or rather shall have, everything needful for a brilliant retreat. Sometimes I seem almost to be longing for a defeat, a decisive one, so that we might have a chance of showing what is in us and putting an end to this irksome inactivity. Monday, July 30th. Westerly wind with northwesterly by way of a pleasant variety. Such is our daily fare week after week. On coming up in the morning, I no longer care to look at the weathercock on the masthead or at the line in the water, for I know beforehand that the former points east or southeast, and the line in the contrary direction, and that we are ever bearing to the southeast. Yesterday it was 81 degrees 7 minutes north latitude, the day before 81 degrees 11 minutes, and last Monday, July 25th, 81 degrees 26 minutes. But it occupies my thoughts no longer. I know well enough there will be a change some time or other, and the way to the stars leads through adversity. I have found a new world, and that is the world of animal and plant life that exists in almost every freshwater pool on the ice floes. From morning till evening and till late in the night, I am absorbed with the microscope and see nothing around me. I live with these tiny beings in their separate universe, where they are born and die, generation after generation, where they pursue each other in the struggle for life and carry on their love affairs with the same feelings, the same sufferings, and the same joys that permeate every living being, from these microscopic animalcules up to man. Self-preservation and propagation, that is the whole story. Fiercely as we human beings struggle to push our way on through the labyrinth of life, their struggles are assuredly no less fierce than ours. One incessant, restless hurrying to and fro, pushing all others aside to burrow out for themselves what is needful to them. And as to love, only mark with what passion they seek each other out. With all our brain cells we do not feel more strongly than they, never live so entirely for a sensation. But what is life? What matters the individual suffering, so long as the struggle goes on? And these are small, one-celled lumps of viscous matter, teeming in thousands and millions on nearly every single floe over the whole of this boundless sea, which we are apt to regard as the realm of death. Mother Nature has a remarkable power of producing life everywhere. Even this ice is a fruitful soil for her. In the evening a little variety occurred in our uneventful existence, Johansen having discovered a bear to the southeast of the ship, but out of range. It had no doubt been prowling about for some time while we were below at supper, and had been quite near us, but being alarmed by some sound or other had gone off eastwards. Sverdrup and I set out after it, but to no purpose. The lanes hindered us too much, and moreover a fog came on, so that we had to return after having gone a good distance. The world of organisms I above alluded to was the subject of special research through the short summer, and in many respects was quite remarkable. When the sun's rays had gained power on the surface of the ice and melted the snow so that pools were formed, there was soon to be seen at the bottom of these pools small yellowish-brown spots, so small that at first one hardly noticed them. Day by day they increased in size, and absorbing, like all dark substances, the heat of the sun's rays, they gradually melted the underlying ice and formed round cavities, often several inches deep. These brown spots were the above-mentioned algae and diatoms. They developed speedily in the summer light, and would fill the bottoms of the cavities with a thick layer. But there were not plants only, the water also teemed with swarms of animalcules, mostly Infusoria and Flagellata, which subsisted on the plants. I actually found bacteria. Even these regions are not free from them. But I could not always remain chained by the microscope. Sometimes, when the fine weather tempted me irresistibly, I had to go out and bake myself in the sun, and imagine myself in Norway. Saturday, August 4th. Lovely weather yesterday and today. Light fleecy clouds sailing high aloft through the sparkling azure sky, filling one's soul with longings to soar as high and as free as they. I have just been out on deck this evening. One could almost imagine oneself at home by the fjord. Saturday evening's peace seemed to rest on the scene and on one's soul. Our sailmakers Sverdrup and Amundsen have today finished covering the first double kayak with sailcloth. Fully equipped, it weighs 30.5 kilos, 60 pounds. I think it will prove a first-rate contrivance. Sverdrup and I tried it on a pool. It carried us splendidly, and was so stiff that even sitting on the deck we could handle it quite comfortably. It will easily carry 2 men with full equipment for 100 days. A handier or more practical craft for regions like this I cannot well imagine. Sunday, August 5th, 81 degrees, 7.3 minutes north latitude. I can't forget the sparkling fjord when the church boat rose in the morning. Brilliant summer weather. I bathe in the sun and dream I am at home, either on the high mountains or, heaven knows why, on the fjords of the west coast. The same white fleecy clouds in the clear blue summer sky. Heaven arches itself overhead like a perfect dome. There is nothing to bar one's way, and the soul rises up unfettered beneath it. What matters it that the world below is different, the ice no longer single glittering glaciers, but spread out on every hand? Is it not these same fleecy clouds far away in the blue expanse that the eye looks for at home on a bright summer day? Sailing on these, fancy steers its course to the land of wistful longing, and it is just at these glittering glaciers in the distance that we direct our longing gaze. Why should not a summer day be as lovely here? Ah, yes, it is lovely, pure as a dream, without desire, without sin, a poem of clear white sunbeams refracted in the cool, crystal blue of the ice. How unutterably delightful does not this world appear to us on some stifling summer day at home? Have rested and kept Sunday. I could not remain in the whole day, so took a long trip over the ice. Progress is easy, except for the lanes. Johansen practiced kayak paddling this afternoon on the pool around the ship, from which several channels diverge over the ice, but he was not content with paddling round in them, but must of course make an experiment in capsizing and recovering himself as the Eskimos do. It ended by his not coming up again, losing his paddle, remaining head downwards in the water, and beating about with his hands till the kayak filled, and he got a cold bath from top to toe. Nordahl, who was standing by on the ice to help him, at last found it necessary to go in after him and raise him up on an even keel again, to the great amusement of us others. One can notice that it is summer. This evening a game of cards is being played on deck, with Peake's big pot for a card table. One could almost think it was an August evening at home. Only the toddy is wanting, but the pipes and cigars we have. Sunday, August 12th. We had a shooting competition in the forenoon. A glorious evening. I took a stroll over the ice among the lanes and hummocks. It was so wonderfully calm and still. Not a sound to be heard but the drip-drip of water from a block of ice, and the dull sound of a snow-slip from some hummock in the distance. The sun is low down in the north, and overhead is the pale blue dome of heaven with gold-edged clouds. The profound peace of the Arctic solitudes. My thoughts fly free and far. If one could only give utterance to all that stirs one's soul on such an evening as this. What an incomprehensible power one's surroundings have over one. Why is it that at times I complain of the loneliness? With nature around one, with one's books and studies, one can never be quite alone. Thursday, August 16th. Yesterday evening, as I was lying in my berth reading, and all except the watch had turned in, I heard the report of a gun on deck over my head. Thinking it was a bear, I hurriedly put on my sea-boots and sprang on deck. There I saw Johansen, bareheaded, rifle in hand. "Was it you that fired that shot?" "Yes, I shot at the big hummock yonder. I thought something was stirring there, and I wanted to see what it was, but it seems to have been nothing." I went to the railings and looked out. I fancied it was a bear that was after our meat, but it was nothing. As we stood there, one of the dogs came jogging along from the big hummock. "Then you see what you have shot at," I said, laughing. "I'm bothered if it wasn't a dog," he replied. Ice Bear it was, true enough, for so we called this dog. It had seemed so large in the fog, scratching at the meat hummock. "Did you aim at the dog and miss? That was a lucky chance." "No, I simply fired at random in that direction, for I wanted to see what it was." I went below and turned in again. At breakfast today he had, of course, to run the gauntlet of some sarcastic questions about his harmless thunderbolt, but he parried them adroitly enough. Tuesday, August 21st. North latitude 81 degrees 4.2 minutes. Strange how little alteration there is. We drift a little to the north, then a little to the south, and keep almost to the same spot. But I believe, as I have believed all along, since before we even set out, that we should be away 3 years, or rather 3 winters and 4 summers, neither more nor less, and that in about 2 years' time from this present autumn we shall reach home. Footnote: It was 2 years later to a day that the Fram put in at Skjervøy, on the coast of Norway. The approaching winter will drift us further, however slowly, and it begins already to announce itself, for there were 4 degrees of cold last night. Sunday, August 26th. It seems almost as if winter had come. The cold has kept on an average between 24.8 degrees Fahrenheit, -4 degrees Celsius, and 21.2 degrees Fahrenheit, -6 degrees Celsius, since Thursday. There are only slight variations in the temperature up here, so we may expect it to fall regularly from this time forth, though it is rather early for winter to set in. All the pools and lanes are covered with ice, thick enough to bear a man, even without snowshoes. I went out on my snowshoes both morning and afternoon. The surface was beautiful everywhere. Some of the lanes had opened out or been compressed a little, so that the new ice was thin and bent unpleasantly under the snowshoes, but it bore me, though 2 of the dogs fell through. A good deal of snow had fallen, so there was fine, soft new snow to travel over. If it keeps on as it is now, there will be excellent snowshoeing in the winter, for it is fresh water that now freezes on the surface, so that there is no salt that the wind can carry from the new ice to spoil the snow all around, as was the case last winter. Such snow with salt in it makes as heavy a surface as sand. Monday, August 27th. Just as Blessing was going below after his watch tonight and was standing by the rail looking out, he saw a white form that lay rolling in the snow a little way off to the southeast. Afterwards it remained for a while lying quite still. Johansen, who was to relieve Blessing, now joined him, and they both stood watching the animal intently. Presently it got up, so there was no longer any doubt as to what it was. Each got hold of a rifle and crept stealthily towards the forecastle, where they waited quietly while the bear cautiously approached the ship, making long tacks against the wind. A fresh breeze was blowing and the windmill going round at full speed, but this did not alarm him at all. Very likely it was this very thing he wanted to examine. At last he reached the lane in front, when they both fired, and he fell down dead on the spot. It was nice to get fresh meat again. This was the first bear we had shot this year, and of course we had roast bear for dinner today. Regular winter with snowstorms. Wednesday, August 29th. A fresh wind. It rattles and pipes in the rigging aloft. An enlivening change, and no mistake. The snow drifts as if it were midwinter. Fine August weather. But we are bearing north again, and we have need to. Yesterday our latitude was 80 degrees 53.5 minutes. This evening I was standing in the hold at work on my new bamboo kayak, which will be the very acme of lightness. Pettersen happened to come down and give me a hand with some lashings that I was busy with. We chatted a little about things in general, and he was of opinion that we had a good crib of it on board the Fram, because here we had everything we wanted, and she was a devil of a ship, and any other ship would have been crushed flat long ago. But for all that, he would not be afraid, he said, to leave her when he saw all the contrivances, such as these new kayaks, we had been getting ready. He was sure no former expedition had ever had such contrivances, or been so equipped against all possible emergencies as we. But after all, he would prefer to return home on the Fram. Then we talked about what we should do when we did get home. "Oh, for your part, no doubt you'll be off to the South Pole," he said. "And you," I replied, "will you tuck up your sleeves and begin again at the old work?" "Oh, very likely, but on my word I ought to have a week's holiday first. After such a trip I should want it before buckling to at the sledge-hammer again." End of File 16. File number 17 of Farthest North, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskedahl. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 1. Chapter 8, Second Autumn in the Ice, Part 1. So summer was over, and our second autumn and winter were beginning. But we were now more inured to the trials of patience attendant on this life, and time passed quickly. Besides, I myself was now taken up with new plans and preparations. Allusion has several times been made to the fact that we had, during the course of the summer, got everything into readiness for the possibility of having to make our way home across the ice. 6 double kayaks had been built, the hand sledges were in good order, and careful calculation had been made of the amount of food, clothing, fuel, etc., that it would be necessary to carry. But I had also quietly begun to make preparations for my own meditated expedition north. In August, as already mentioned, I had begun to work at a single kayak, the framework made of bamboo. I had said nothing about my plan yet, except a few words to Sverdrup. It was impossible to tell how far north the drift would take us, and so many things might happen before spring. In the meantime, life on board went on as usual. There were the regular observations and all sorts of occupations, and I myself was not so absorbed in my plans that I did not find time for other things too. Thus I see from my diary that in the end of August and in September I must have been very proud of a new invention that I made for the galley. All last year we had cooked on a particular kind of copper range, heated by petroleum lamps. It was quite satisfactory, except that it burned several quarts of petroleum a day. I could not help fearing sometimes that our lighting supply might run short if the expedition lasted longer than was expected, and always wondered if it would not be possible to construct an apparatus that would burn coal oil, black oil, as we call it on board, of which we had 20 tons, originally intended for the engine. And I succeeded in making such an apparatus. On August 30th I write, "Have tried my newly invented coal oil apparatus for heating the range, and it is beyond expectation successful. It is splendid that we shall be able to burn coal oil in the galley. Now there is no fear of our having to cry ourselves blind for lack of light by and by. This adds more than 4,000 gallons to our stock of oil, and we can keep all our fine petroleum now for lighting purposes, and have lamps for many a year, even if we are a little extravagant. The 20 tons of coal oil ought to keep the range going for 4 years, I think." The contrivance is as simple as possible. From a reservoir of oil, a pipe leads down and into the fireplace. The oil drips down from the end of this pipe into an iron bowl, and is here sucked up by a sheet of asbestos or by coal ashes. The flow of oil from the pipe is regulated by a fine valve cock. To ensure a good draft, I bring a ventilating pipe from outside right by the range door. Air is pressed through this by a large windsail on deck and blows straight on to the iron bowl, where the oil burns briskly with a clear white flame. Whoever lights the fire in the morning has only to go on deck and see that the windsail is set to the wind, to open the ventilator, to turn the cock so that the oil runs properly, and then set it burning with a scrap of paper. It looks after itself, and the water is boiling in 20 minutes or half an hour. One could not have anything much easier than this, it seems to me. But of course in our, as in other communities, it is difficult to introduce reforms. Everything new is looked upon with suspicion. Somewhat later I write of the same apparatus. We are now using the galley again with the coal oil fire. The moving down took place the day before yesterday, and the fire was used yesterday. It works capitally. A 3-foot wind is enough to give a splendid draught. The day before yesterday, when I was sitting with some of the others in the saloon in the afternoon, I heard a dull report out in the galley, and said at once that it sounded like an explosion. Presently Pettersen stuck a head in at the door as black as a sweep's, great lumps of soot all over it, and said that the stove had exploded right into his face. He was only going to look if it was burning rightly, and the whole fiendish thing flew out at him. A stream of words, not unmingled with oaths, flowed like peas out of a sack, while the rest of us yelled with laughter. In the galley it was easy to see that something had happened. The walls were covered with soot in lumps and stripes pointing toward the fireplace. The explanation of the accident was simple enough. The draught had been insufficient, and a quantity of gas had formed which had not been able to burn until air was let in by Pettersen opening the door. This is a good beginning. I told Pettersen in the evening that I would do the cooking myself next day, when the real trial was to be made, but he would not hear of such a thing. He said I was not to think that he minded a trifle like that. I might trust to its being all right, and it was all right. From that day I heard nothing but praise of the new apparatus, and it was used until the Fram was out in the open sea again. Thursday, September 6th, 81 degrees, 13.7 minutes north latitude. Have I been married 5 years today? Last year this was a day of victory, when the ice fetters burst at Timor Island, but there is no thought of victory now. We are not so far north as I had expected. The northwest wind has come again, and we are drifting south. And yet the future does not seem to me so long and so dark as it sometimes has done. Next September 6th? Can it be possible that then every fetter will have burst, and we shall be sitting together talking of this time in the far north, and of all the longing, as of something that once was and that will never be again? The long, long night is past. The morning is just breaking, and a glorious new day lies before us. And what is there against this happening next year? Why should not this winter carry the Fram west to some place north of Franz Josef Land? And then my time has come, and off I go with dogs and sledges to the north. My heart beats with joy at the very thought of it. The winter shall be spent in making every preparation for that expedition, and it will pass quickly. I have already spent much time on these preparations. I think of everything that must be taken and how it is to be arranged, and the more I look at the thing from all points of view, the more firmly convinced do I become that the attempt will be successful, if only the Fram can get north in reasonable time, not too late in the spring. If she could just reach 84 degrees or 85 degrees, then I should be off in the end of February or the first days of March, as soon as the daylight comes, after the long winter night, and the whole would go like a dance. Only 4 or 5 months, and the time for action will have come again. What joy! When I look out over the ice now, it is as if my muscles quivered with longing to be striding off over it in real earnest. Fatigue and privation will then be a delight. It may seem foolish that I should be determined to go off on this expedition, when perhaps I might do more important work quietly here on board, but the daily observations will be carried on exactly the same. I have celebrated the day by arranging my workroom for the winter. I have put in a petroleum stove and expect that this will make it warm enough even in the coldest weather, with the snow walls that I intend to build round the outside of it, and a good roof covering of snow. At least double the amount of work will be done if this cabin can be used in winter, and I can sit up here instead of in the midst of the racket below. I have such comfortable times of it now, in peace and quietness, letting my thoughts take their way unchecked. Sunday, September 9th. 81 degrees, 4 minutes north latitude. The midnight sun disappeared some days ago, and already the sun sets in the northwest. It is gone by 10 o'clock in the evening, and there is once more a glow over the eternal white. Winter is coming fast. Another peaceful Sunday with rest from work and a little reading. Out snowshoeing today, I crossed several frozen-over lanes, and very slight packing has begun here and there. I was stopped at last by a broad open lane, lying pretty nearly north and south. At places it was 400 to 500 yards across, and I saw no end to it either north or south. The surface was good. One got along quickly, with no exertion at all when it was in the direction of the wind. This is undeniably a monotonous life. Sometimes it feels to me like a long dark night, my life's Ragnarok, dividing it into two. The sun is darkened, the summer's with it, all weather is weighty with woe. Snow covers the earth, the wind whistles over the endless plains, and for 3 years this winter lasts, till comes the time for the great battle, and men tramp hell's way. There is a hard struggle between life and death, but after that comes the reign of peace. The earth rises from the sea again and decks itself anew with verdure. Torrents roar, eagles hover over them watching for fish among the rocks, and then Valhalla, fairer than the sun, and long length of happy days. Pettersen, who is cook this week, came in here this evening as usual to get the bill of fare for next day. When his business was done, he stood for a minute, and then said that he had had such a strange dream last night. He had wanted to be taken as cook with a new expedition, but Dr. Nansen wouldn't have him. And why not? Well, this was how it was. I dreamed that Dr. Nansen was going off across the ice to the pole with 4 men, and I asked to be taken. But you said that you didn't need a cook on this expedition, and I thought that was queer enough, for you would surely want food on this trip as well. It seemed to me that you had ordered the ship to meet you at some other place. Anyhow, you were not coming back here, but to some other land. It's strange that one can lie and rake up such a lot of nonsense in one's sleep. That was perhaps not such very great nonsense, Pettersen. It is quite possible that we might have to make such an expedition, but if we did, we should certainly not come back to the Fram. Well, if that happened, I would ask to go, sure enough, for it's just what I should like. I'm no great snowshoer, but I would manage to keep up somehow. That's all very well, but there's a great deal of weary hard work on a journey like that. You needn't think it's all pleasure. No, no one would expect that, but it would be all right if I might only go. But there might be worse than hardships, Pettersen. It would more than likely mean risking your life. I don't care for that either. A man has got to die sometime. Yes, but you don't want to shorten your life? Oh, I would take my chance of that. You can lose your life at home, too, though perhaps not quite so easily as here. But if a man was always to be thinking about that, he would never do anything. That's true. Anyhow, he would not need to come on an expedition like this. But remember that a journey northward over the ice would be no child's play. No, I know that well enough. But if it was with you, I shouldn't be afraid. It would never do if we had to manage alone. We'd be sure to go wrong, but it's quite a different thing, you see, when there is one to lead that you know has been through it all before. It is extraordinary, the blind faith such men have in their leader. I believe they would set off without a moment's reflection if they were asked to join in an expedition to the pole now, with black winter at the door. It is grand as long as the faith lasts, but God be merciful to him, on the day that it fails. Saturday, September 15th. This evening we have seen the moon again for the first time. Beautiful full moon, and a few stars were also visible in the night sky, which is still quite light. Notices were posted up today in several places. They ran as follows. As fire here on board might be followed by the most terrible consequences, too great precaution cannot be taken. For this reason, every man is requested to observe the following rules most conscientiously. 1. No one is to carry matches. 2. The only places where matches may be kept are 1. The galley, where the cook for the time being is responsible for them. 2. The 4 single cabins, where the inmate of each is responsible for his box. 3. The work cabin, when work is going on. 4. On the mast in the saloon, from which neither box nor single matches must be taken away under any circumstances. 3. Matches must not be struck anywhere except in the places above named. 4. The one exception to the above rules is made when the forge has to be lighted. 5. All the ship's holds are to be inspected every evening at 8 o'clock by the fire inspector, who will give in his report to the undersigned. After that time no one may, without special permission, take a light into the holds or into the engine room. 6. Smoking is only allowed in the living rooms and on deck. Lighted pipes or cigars must on no account be seen elsewhere. Fridtjof Nansen, Fram, September 15th, 1894. Some of these regulations may seem to infringe on the principle of equality which I have been so anxious to maintain, but these seem to me the best arrangements I can make to ensure the good of all, and that must come before everything else. Friday, September 21st. We have had tremendously strong wind from the northwest and north for some days, with a velocity at times of 39 and 42 feet. During this time we must have drifted a good way south. The radical right had got hold of the helm, said Amundsen, but their time in power was short, for it fell calm yesterday, and now we are going north again, and it looks as if the left were to have a spell at the helm to repair the wrongs done by the right. Kennels for the dogs have been built this week, a row of splendid ice houses along the port side of the ship, 4 dogs in each house, good warm winter quarters. In the meantime our 8 little pups are thriving on board. They have a grand world to wander round, the whole foredeck with an awning over it. You can hear their little barks and yelps as they rush about among shavings, hand sledges, the steam winch, mill axle, and other odds and ends. They play a little, and they fight a little, and forward under the forecastle they have their bed among the shavings, a very cozy corner, where Kvik lies stretched out like a lioness in all her majesty. There they tumble over each other in a heap round her, sleep, yawn, eat, and pull each other's tails. It is a picture of home and peace here near the pole, which one could watch by the hour. Life goes its regular, even, uneventful way, quiet as the ice itself, and yet it is wonderful how quickly the time passes. The equinox has come, the nights are beginning to turn dark, and at noon the sun is only 9 degrees above the horizon. I pass the day busily here in the work cabin, and often feel as if I were sitting in my study at home, with all the comforts of civilization round me. If it were not for the separation, one could be as well off here as there. Sometimes I forget where I am. Not infrequently in the evening, when I have been sitting absorbed in work, I have jumped up to listen when the dogs barked, thinking to myself, who can be coming? Then I remember that I am not at home, but drifting out in the middle of the frozen polar sea at the commencement of the second long Arctic night. The temperature has been down to 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, minus 17 degrees Celsius today. Winter is coming on fast. There is little drift just now, and yet we are in good spirits. It was the same last autumn equinox, but how many disappointments we have had since then! How terrible it was in the later autumn, when every calculation seemed to fail as we drifted farther and farther south. not one bright spot on our horizon. But such a time will never come again. There may still be great relapses, there may be slow progress for a time, but there is no doubt as to the future. We see it dawning, bright in the west, beyond the Arctic night. Sunday, September 23rd. It was a year yesterday since we made fast for the first time to the great hummock in the ice. Johansen improved the occasion by making a chart of our drift for the year. It does not look so very bad, though the distance is not great. The direction is almost exactly what I had expected. But more of this tomorrow. It is so late that I cannot write about it now. The nights are turning darker and darker. Winter is settling down upon us. Tuesday, September 25th. I have been looking more carefully at the calculation of our last year's drift. If we reckon from the place where we were shut in on the 22nd of September last year to our position on the 22nd of September this year, the distance we have drifted is 189 miles, equal to 3 degrees 9 minutes latitude. Reckoning from the same place, but to the farthest north point we reached in summer, July 16th, makes the drift 225 miles, or 3 degrees 46 minutes. But if we reckon from our most southern point in the autumn of last year, November 7th, to our most northern point this summer, then the drift is 305 miles, or 5 degrees 5 minutes. We got fully 4 degrees north, from 77 degrees 43 minutes to 81 degrees 53 minutes. To give the course of the drift is a difficult task in these latitudes, as there is a perceptible deviation of the compass with every degree of longitude as one passes east or west. The change, of course, given in degrees, will be almost exactly the same as the number of degrees of longitude that have been passed. Our average course will be about north 36 degrees west. The direction of our drift is consequently a much more northerly one than the Jeanette's was, and this is just what we expected. Ours cuts hers at an angle of 59 degrees. The line of this year's drift continued will cut the northeast island of Spitzbergen and take us as far north as 84 degrees 7 minutes in 75 degrees east longitude, somewhere north-northeast of Franz Josef Land. The distance by this course to the northeast island is 827 miles. Should we continue to progress only at the rate of 189 miles a year, it would take us 4.4 years to do this distance. But assuming our progress to be at the rate of 305 miles a year, we shall do it in 2.7 years. That we should drift at least as quickly as this seems probable, because we can hardly now be driven back as we were in October last year, when we had the open water to the south and the great mass of ice to the north of us. The past summer seems to me to have proved that while the ice is very unwilling to go back south, it is most ready to go northwest as soon as there is ever so little easterly, not to mention southerly wind. I therefore believe, as I always have believed, that the drift will become faster as we get farther northwest, and the probability is that the Fram will reach Norway in 2 years, the expedition having lasted its full 3 years, as I somehow had a feeling that it would. As our drift is 59 degrees more northerly than the Jeanette's, and as Franz Josef Land must force the ice north, taking for granted that all that comes from this great basin goes round to the north of Franz Josef Land, it is probable that our course will become more northerly the farther on we go, until we are past Franz Josef Land, and that we shall consequently reach a higher latitude than our drift so far would indicate. I hope 85 degrees at least. Everything has come right so far. The direction of our drift is exactly parallel with the course which I conjectured to have been taken by the floe with the Jeanette relics, and which I pricked out on the chart prepared for my London address. This course touched about 87.5 degrees north latitude. I have no right to expect a more northerly drift than parallel to this, and have no right to be anything but happy if I get as far. Our aim, as I have so often tried to make clear, is not so much to reach the point in which the Earth's axis terminates, as to traverse and explore the unknown polar sea. And yet I should like to get to the pole, too, and hope that it will be possible to do so, if only we can reach 84 degrees or 85 degrees by March, and why should we not? Thursday, September 27th. Have determined that beginning from tomorrow, every man is to go out snowshoeing 2 hours daily, from 11 to 1, so long as the daylight lasts. It is necessary. If anything happened that obliged us to make our way home over the ice, I am afraid some of the company would be a terrible hindrance to us, unpractised as they are now. Several of them are first-rate snowshoers, but 5 or 6 of them would soon be feeling the pleasures of learning. If they had to go out on a long course, and without snowshoes, it would be all over with us. After this we used to go out regularly in a body. Besides being good exercise, it was also a great pleasure. Every one seemed to thrive on it, and they all became accustomed to the use of the shoes on this ground, even though they often got them broken in the unevenness of the pressure ridges. We just patched and riveted them together to break them again. Monday, October 1st. We tried a hand sledge today with a load of 250 pounds. It went along easily, and yet was hard to draw, because the snowshoes were apt to slip to the side on the sort of surface we had. I almost believe that Indian snowshoes would be better on this ground, where there are so many knobs and smooth hillocks to draw the sledges over. When Amundsen first began to pull the sledge, he thought it was nothing at all, but when he had gone on for a time he fell into a fit of deep and evidently sad thought, and went silently home. When he got on board, he confided to the others that if a man had to draw a load like that, he might just as well lie down at once. It would come to the same thing in the end. That is how practice is apt to go. In the afternoon I yoked 3 dogs to the same little sledge with the 250 pounds load, and they drew it along as if it were nothing at all. Tuesday, October 2nd. Beautiful weather, but coldish. 49 degrees Fahrenheit of frost, minus 27 degrees Celsius during the night, which is a good deal for October, surely. It will be a cold winter if it goes on at the same rate. But what do we care whether there are 90 degrees of frost or 120 degrees? A good snowshoeing excursion today. They are all becoming most expert now, but darkness will be on us presently, and then there will be no more of it. It is a pity. This exercise is so good for us. We must think of something to take its place. I have a feeling now as if this were to be my last winter on board. Will it really come to my going off north in spring? The experiment in drawing a loaded hand sledge over this ice was certainly anything but promising, and if the dogs should not hold out, or should be of less use than we expect, and if we should come to worse ice instead of better, well, we should only have ourselves to trust to. But if we can just get so far on with the Fram that the distance left to be covered is at all a reasonable one, I believe that it is my duty to make the venture, and I cannot imagine any difficulty that will not be overcome when our choice lies between death and onward and home. Thursday, October 4th. The ice is rather impassable in places, but there are particular lanes or tracts. Taking it altogether, it is in good condition for sledging and snowshoeing, though the surface is rather soft, so that the dogs sink in a little. This is probably chiefly owing to there having been no strong winds of late, so that the snow has not been well packed together. Life goes on in the regular routine. There is always some little piece of work turning up to be done. Yesterday the breaking in of the young dogs began. It was just the 3, Barbara, Freya, and Susina. Gulebrand is such a miserable thin wretch that he is escaping for the present. They were unmanageable at first and rushed about in all directions, but in a little while they drew like old dogs and were altogether better than we expected. Kvik, of course, set them a noble example. It fell to Mogstad's lot to begin the training, as it was his week for looking after the dogs. This duty is taken in turns now. Each man has his week of attending to them both morning and afternoon. It seems to me that a very satisfactory state of feeling prevails on board at present, when we are just entering on our second Arctic night, which we hope is to be a longer and probably also a colder one than any people before us have experienced. There is appreciably less light every day, soon there will be none, but the good spirits do not wane with the light. It seems to me that we are more uniformly cheerful than we have ever been. What the reason of this is I cannot tell, perhaps just custom, but certainly, too, we are well off, in clover, as the saying is. We are drifting gently, but it is to be hoped surely, on through the dark unknown Nebelheim, where terrified fancy has pictured all possible horrors. Yet we are living a life of luxury and plenty, surrounded by all the comforts of civilization. I think we shall be better off this winter than last. The firing apparatus in the galley is working splendidly, and the cook himself is now of opinion that it is an invention which approaches perfection. So we shall burn nothing but coal oil there now. It warms the place well, and a good deal of the heat comes up here into the workroom, where I sometimes sit and perspire until I have to take off one garment after another, although the window is open and there are 30-odd degrees of cold outside. I have calculated that the petroleum which this enables us to keep for lighting purposes only will last at least 10 years, though we burn it freely 300 days in the year. At present we are not using petroleum lamps at the rate assumed in my calculation, because we frequently have electric light. And then even here summer comes once a year, or at any rate something which we must call summer. Even allowing for accidents, such as the possibility of a tank springing a leak and the oil running out, there is still no reason whatever for being sparing of light, and every man can have as much as he wants. What this means can best be appreciated by one who, for a whole year, has felt the stings of conscience every time he went to work or read alone in his cabin and burned a lamp that was not absolutely necessary, because he could have used the general one in the saloon. As yet the coals are not being touched except for the stove in the saloon, where they are to be allowed to burn as much as they like this winter. The quantity thus consumed will be a trifle in comparison with our store of about 100 tons, for which we cannot well have any other use until the Fram once more forces her way out of the ice on the other side. Another thing that is of no little help in keeping us warm and comfortable is the awning that is now stretched over the ship. The only part I have left open is the stern, abaft the bridge, so as to be able to see round over the ice from there. Personally, I must say that things are going well with me, much better than I could have expected. Time is a good teacher. That devouring longing does not gnaw so hard as it did. Is it apathy beginning? Shall I feel nothing at all by the time 10 years have passed? Oh, sometimes it comes on with all its old strength, as if it would tear me in pieces. But this is a splendid school of patience. Much good it does to sit wondering whether they are alive or dead at home. It only almost drives one mad. All the same, I never grow quite reconciled to this life. It is really neither life nor death, but a state between the two. It means never being at rest about anything or in any place, a constant waiting for what is coming, a waiting in which perhaps the best years of one's manhood will pass. It is like what a young boy sometimes feels when he goes on his first voyage. The life on board is hateful to him. He suffers cruelly from all the torments of seasickness, and being shut in within the narrow walls of the ship is worse than prison. But it is something that has to be gone through. Beyond it all lies the south, the land of his youthful dreams, tempting with its sunny smile. In time he arises, half dead. Does he find his south? How often it is but a barren desert he is cast ashore on. Sunday, October 7th. It has cleared up this evening, and there is a starry sky and aurora borealis. It is a little change from the constant cloudy weather with frequent snow showers which we have had these last days. Thoughts come and thoughts go. I cannot forget, and I cannot sleep. Everything is still. All are asleep. I only hear the quiet step of the watch on deck, the wind rustling in the rigging and the canvas, and the clock gently hacking the time in pieces there on the wall. If I go on deck, there is black night, stars sparkling high overhead, and faint aurora flickering across the gloomy vault, and out in the darkness I can see the glimmer of the great monotonous plain of the ice. It is all so inexpressibly forlorn, so far, far removed from the noise and unrest of men and all their striving. What is life thus isolated? A strange, aimless process, and man a machine which eats, sleeps, awakes, eats and sleeps again, dreams, but never lives. Or is life really nothing else? And is it just one more phase of the eternal martyrdom, a new mistake of the erring human soul, this banishing of one's self to the hopeless wilderness, only to long there for what one has left behind? Am I a coward? Am I afraid of death? Oh, no! But in these nights such longing can come over one for all beauty, for that which is contained in a single word, and the soul flees from this interminable and rigid world of ice. When one thinks how short life is, and that one came away from it all of one's own free will, and remembers, too, that another is suffering the pain of constant anxiety, true, till death. O mankind, thy ways are passing strange. We are but as flakes of foam, helplessly driven over the tossing sea. Wednesday, October 10th. Exactly 33 years old, then. There is nothing to be said to that, except that life is moving on and will never turn back. They have all been touchingly nice to me today, and we have held fête. They surprised me in the morning by having the saloon ornamented with flags. They had hung the Union above Sverdrup's place. We accused Amundsen of having done this, but he would not confess to it. Above my door and over Johansen's they had the pennant with Fram in big letters. It looked most festive when I came into the saloon, and they all stood up and wished me many happy returns. When I went on deck, the flag was waving from the mizzen masthead. We took a snowshoeing excursion south in the morning. It was windy, bitter weather. I have not felt so cold for long. The thermometer is down to 24 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, minus 31 degrees Celsius this evening. This is certainly the coldest birthday I have had yet. A sumptuous dinner. 1. Fish pudding. 2. Sausages and tongue with potatoes, haricot beans, and peas. 3. Preserved strawberries with rice and cream. Crown extract of malt. Then, to everyone's surprise, our doctor began to take out of the pocket of the overcoat he always wears remarkable-looking little glasses, medicine glasses, measuring glasses, test glasses, one for each man, and lastly, a whole bottle of Lisholmer liqueur, real native Lisholmer, which awakened general enthusiasm. 2 drachms of that per man was not so bad, besides a quarter of a bottle of extract of malt. Coffee after dinner with a surprise in the shape of apple cake baked by our excellent cook Pedersen, formerly smith and engineer. Then I had to produce my cigars, which were also much enjoyed, and of course we kept holiday all the afternoon. At supper there was another surprise, a large birthday cake from the same baker with the inscription TLMD. Til lykke med dagen, the Norwegian equivalent for wishing a happy birthday, 10/10/94. In the evening came pineapples, figs, and sweets. Many a worse birthday might be spent in lower altitudes than 81 degrees. The evening is passing with all kinds of merriment, everyone is in good spirits, the saloon resounds with laughter. How many a merry meeting it has been the scene of. But when one has said good night and sits here alone, sadness comes. and if one goes on deck, there are the stars high overhead in the clear sky. In the south is a smoldering aurora arch, which from time to time sends up streamers, a constant restless flickering. We have been talking a little about this expedition, Sverdrup and I. When we were out on the ice in the afternoon, he suddenly said, "Yes, next October you will, perhaps, not be on board the Fram." To which I had to answer that unless the winter turned out badly, I probably should not. But still I cannot believe in this rightly myself. Every night I am at home in my dreams, but when the morning breaks, I must again, like Helga, gallop back on the pale horse by the way of the reddening dawn, not to the joys of Valhalla, but to the realm of eternal ice. For thee alone, Sigrun, of the Sava mountain, must Helga swim in the dew of sorrow. End of File 17. File 18 of Farthest North, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskedahl. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 1. Chapter 8, Second Autumn in the Ice, Part 2. Friday, October 12th. A regular storm has been blowing from the east-southeast since yesterday evening. Last night the mill went to bits. The teeth broke off one of the toothed wheels, which has been considerably worn by a year's use. The velocity of the wind was over 40 feet this morning, and it is long since I have heard it blow as it is doing this evening. We must be making good progress north just now. Perhaps October is not to be such a bad month as I expected from our experiences of last year. Was out snowshoeing before dinner. The snow was whistling about my ears. I had not much trouble in getting back, the wind saw to that. A tremendous snow squall is blowing just now. The moon stands low in the southern sky, sending a dull glow through the driving masses. One has to hold on to one's cap. This is a real dismal polar night, such as one imagines it to oneself sitting at home far away in the south. But it makes me cheerful to come on deck, for I feel that we are moving onward. Saturday, October 13th. Same wind today, velocity up to 39 feet and higher, but Johansen has taken an observation this evening in spite of it. He is, as always, a fine, indefatigable fellow. We are going northwest, 81 degrees, 32 minutes, 8 seconds north latitude, 118 degrees, 28 minutes east longitude. Sunday, October 14th. Still the same storm going on. I am reading of the continual sufferings which the earlier Arctic explorers had to contend with for every degree, even for every minute of their northward course. It gives me almost a feeling of contempt for us, lying here on sofas, warm and comfortable, passing the time reading and writing and smoking and dreaming, while the storm is tugging and tearing at the rigging above us, and the whole sea is one mass of driving snow, through which we are carried degree by degree northwards to the goal our predecessors struggled towards, spending their strength in vain. And yet, now sinks the sun, now comes the night. Monday, October 15th. Went snowshoeing eastwards this morning, still against the same wind and the same snowfall. You have to pay careful attention to your course these days, as the ship is not visible any great distance, and if you did not find your way back, well... But the tracks remain pretty distinct, as the snow crust is blown bare in most places, and the drifting snow does not fasten upon it. We are moving northwards, and meanwhile the Arctic night is making its slow and majestic entrance. The sun was low today. I did not see it because of banks of cloud in the south, but it still sent its light up over the pale sky. There the full moon is now reigning, bathing the great ice plain and the drifting snow in its bright light. How a night such as this raises one's thoughts! It does not matter if one has seen the like 1,000 times before. It makes the same solemn impression when it comes again. One cannot free one's mind from its power. It is like entering a still, holy temple, where the spirit of nature hovers through the place on glittering silver beams, and the soul must fall down and adore the infinity of the universe. Wednesday, October 17th. We are employed in taking deep-water temperatures. It is a doubtful pleasure at this time of year. Sometimes the water lifter gets coated with ice so that it will not close down below in the water, and has therefore to hang for ever so long each time, and sometimes it freezes tight during the observation after it is brought up, so that the water will not run out of it into the sample bottles, not to mention all the bother there is getting the apparatus ready to lower. We are lucky if we do not require to take the whole thing into the galley every time to thaw it. It is slow work. The temperatures have sometimes to be read by lantern light. The water samples are not so reliable because they freeze in the lifter, but the thing can be done, and we must just go on doing it. The same easterly wind is blowing, and we are drifting onwards. Our latitude this evening is about 81 degrees 47 minutes north. Thursday, October 18th. I continue taking the temperatures of the water, rather a cool amusement with the thermometer down to -29 degrees Celsius, 20.2 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, and a wind blowing. Your fingers are apt to get a little stiff and numb when you have to manipulate the wet or ice-covered metal screws with bare hands, and have to read off the thermometer with a magnifying glass in order to ensure accuracy to the 100th part of a degree, and then to bottle the samples of water, which you have to keep close against your breast to prevent the water from freezing. It is a nice business. There was a lovely aurora borealis at 8 o'clock this evening. It wound itself like a fiery serpent in a double coil across the sky. The tail was about 10 degrees above the horizon in the north. Thence it turned off with many windings in an easterly direction, then round again, and westwards in the form of an arch from 30 degrees to 40 degrees above the horizon, sinking down again to the west and rolling itself up into a ball, from which several branches spread out over the sky. The arches were in active motion, while pencils of streamers shot out swiftly from the west towards the east, and the whole serpent kept incessantly undulating into fresh curves. Gradually it mounted up over the sky nearly to the zenith, while at the same time the uppermost bend or arch separated into several fainter undulations. The ball in the northeast glowed intensely, and brilliant streamers shot upwards to the zenith from several places in the arches, especially from the ball and from the bend farthest away in the northeast. The illumination was now at its highest, the color being principally a strong yellow, though at some spots it verged towards a yellowish red, while at other places it was a greenish white. When the upper wave reached the zenith, the phenomenon lost something of its brilliancy, dispersing little by little, leaving merely a faint indication of an aurora in the southern sky. On coming up again on deck later in the evening, I found nearly the whole of the aurora collected in the southern half of the sky. A low arch, 5 degrees in height, could be seen far down in the south over the dark segment of the horizon. Between this and the zenith were 4 other vague wavy arches, the topmost of which passed right across it. Here and there vivid streamers shot flaming upwards, especially from the undermost arch in the south. No arch was to be seen in the northern part of the sky, only streamers every here and there. Tonight, as usual, there are traces of aurora to be seen over the whole sky. Light mists or streamers are often plainly visible, and the sky seems to be constantly covered with a luminous veil, in which every here and there are dark holes. There is scarcely any night, or rather I may safely say there is no night, on which no trace of aurora can be discerned as soon as the sky becomes clear, or even when there is simply a rift in the clouds large enough for it to be seen. and as a rule we have strong light phenomena dancing in ceaseless unrest over the firmament. They mainly appear, however, in the southern part of the sky. Friday, October 19th. A fresh breeze from east-southeast, drifting northwards at a good pace. Soon we shall probably have passed the long-looked-for 82 degrees, and that will not be far from 82 degrees 27 minutes, when the Fram will be the vessel that will have penetrated farthest to the north on this globe. But the barometer is falling. The wind probably will not remain in that quarter long, but will shift round to the west. I only hope for this once the barometer may prove a false prophet. I have become rather sanguine. Things have been going pretty well for so long, and October, a month which last year's experience had made me dread, has been a month of marked advance, if only it doesn't end badly. The wind today, however, was to cost a life. The mill, which had been repaired after the mishap to the cogwheel the other day, was set going again. In the afternoon a couple of the puppies began fighting over a bone, when one of them fell underneath one of the cogwheels on the axle of the mill and was dragged in between it and the deck. Its poor little body nearly made the whole thing come to a standstill, and unfortunately no one was on the spot to stop it in time. I heard the noise and rushed on deck. The puppy had just been drawn out nearly dead. The whole of its stomach was torn open. It gave a faint whine, and was at once put out of its misery. Poor little frolicsome creature! Only a little while ago you were gambolling around, enjoying an innocent romp with your brothers and sisters. Then came the thigh-bone of a bear trembling along the deck from the galley. You and the others made a headlong rush for it, and now there you lie, cruelly lacerated and dead as a herring. Fate is inexorable. Sunday, October 31st. North latitude 82 degrees 0.2 minutes, east longitude 114 degrees 9 minutes. It is late in the evening, and my head is bewildered, as if I had been indulging in a regular debauch, but it was a debauch of a very innocent nature. A grand banquet today to celebrate the 82nd degree of latitude. The observation gave 82 degrees 0.2 minutes last night, and we have now certainly drifted a little farther north. Honey cakes, gingerbread were baked for the occasion, first-class honey cakes, too, you may take my word for it, and then, after a refreshing snowshoe run, came a festal banquet. Notices were stuck up in the saloon requesting the guests to be punctual at dinner-time, for the cook had exerted himself to the utmost of his power. The following deeply felt lines by an anonymous poet also appeared on a placard. When dinner is punctually served at the time, no fear that the milk soup will surely be prime. But the viands are spoilt if you come to it late. The fish pudding will lie on your chest a dead weight. What's preserved in tin cases, there can be no doubt, if you wait long enough, will force its way out. Even meat of the ox, of the sheep, or of swine, very different in this from the juice of the vine. Ramorny and Armour, and thorn and hair this, good meats have preserved, and they taste not amiss. So I'll add just a word, friends, of warning to you. If you want a good dinner, come at 1, not at 2. The lyric melancholy which here finds utterance must have been the outcome of many bitter disappointments, and furnishes a valuable internal evidence as to the anonymous author's profession. Meanwhile the guests assembled with tolerable punctuality, the only exception being your humble servant, who was obliged to take some photographs in the rapidly waning daylight. The menu was splendid. 1. Oxtail soup. 2. Fish pudding with melted butter and potatoes. 3. Turtle with marrow fat, peas, etc., etc. 4. Rice with malter, cloudberries, and cream. Crown malt extract. After dinner, coffee and honey cakes. After supper, which also was excellent, there was a call for music, which was liberally supplied throughout the whole evening by various accomplished performers on the organ, among whom Benson specially distinguished himself, his late experiences on the ice with the crank handle having put him in first-rate training. Every now and then the music dragged a bit, as though it were being hauled up from an abyss some 1,000 or 1,500 fathoms deep. Then it would quicken and get more lively as it came nearer to the surface. At last the excitement rose to such a pitch that Pettersen and I had to get up and have a dance, a waltz and a polka or two, and we really executed some very tasteful pas de deux on the limited floor of the saloon. Then Amundsen also was swept into the mazes of the dance, while the others played cards. Meanwhile refreshments were served in the form of preserved peaches, dried bananas, figs, honey cakes, etc., etc. In short, we made a jovial evening of it, and why should we not? We are progressing merrily towards our goal. We are already halfway between the New Siberian Islands and Franz Josef Land, and there is not a soul on board who doubts that we shall accomplish what we came out to do. So long live merriment! But the endless stillness of the polar night holds its sway aloft. The moon, half full, shines over the ice, and the stars sparkle brilliantly overhead. There are no restless northern lights, and the south wind sighs mournfully through the rigging. A deep, peaceful stillness prevails everywhere. It is the infinite loveliness of death, nirvana. Monday, October 22nd. It is beginning to be cold now. The thermometer was minus 34.6 degrees Celsius, 30.2 degrees Fahrenheit below zero last night, and this evening it is minus 36 degrees Celsius, 32.8 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. A lovely aurora this evening, 11:30. A brilliant corona encircled the zenith with a wreath of streamers in several layers, one outside the other. Then larger and smaller sheaves of streamers spread over the sky, especially low down towards southwest and east-southeast. All of them, however, tended upwards towards the corona, which shone like a halo. I stood watching it a long while. Every now and then I could discern a dark patch in its middle, at the point where all the rays converged. It lay a little south of the pole star and approached Cassiopeia in the position it then occupied. But the halo kept smoldering and shifting just as if a gale in the upper strata of the atmosphere were playing the bellows to it. Presently fresh streamers shot out of the darkness outside the inner halo, followed by other bright shafts of light in a still wider circle, and meanwhile the dark space in the middle was clearly visible. At other times it was entirely covered with masses of light. Then it appeared as if the storm abated, and the whole turned pale, and glowed with a faint whitish hue for a little while, only to shoot wildly up once more, and to begin the same dance over again. Then the entire mass of light around the corona began to rock to and fro in large waves over the zenith and the dark central point, whereupon the gale seemed to increase and whirl the streamers into an inextricable tangle, till they merged into a luminous vapor that enveloped the corona and drowned it in a deluge of light, so that neither it nor the streamers nor the dark center could be seen, nothing, in fact, but a chaos of shining mist. Again it became paler, and I went below. At midnight there was hardly anything of the aurora to be seen. Friday, October 26th. Yesterday evening we were in 82 degrees 3 minutes north latitude. Today the Fram is 2 years old. The sky has been overcast during the last 2 days, and it has been so dark at midday that I thought we should soon have to stop our snowshoe expeditions. But this morning brought us clear, still weather, and I went out on a delightful trip to the westward, where there had been a good deal of fresh packing, but nothing of any importance. In honor of the occasion we had a particularly good dinner, with fried halibut, turtle, pork chops with haricot beans and green peas, plum pudding, real burning plum pudding for the first time, with custard sauce and wound up with strawberries. As usual, the beverages consisted of wine, that is to say, lime juice with water and sugar, and crown malt extract. I fear there was a general overtaxing of the digestive apparatus. After dinner, coffee and honey cakes, with which Nordahl stood cigarettes. General holiday. This evening it has begun to blow from the north, but probably this does not mean much. I must hope so at all events, and trust that we shall soon get a south wind again. But it is not the mild zephyr we yearn for, not the breath of the blushing dawn. No, a cold, biting south wind, roaring with all the force of the polar sea, so that the Fram, the 2-year-old Fram, may be buried in the snowstorm, and all round her be but a reeking frost. It is this we are waiting for, this that will drift us onwards to our goal. Today, then, Fram, thou art 2 years old. I said at the dinner table that if a year ago we were unanimous in believing that the Fram was a good ship, we had much better grounds for that belief today. For safely and surely she is carrying us onwards, even if the speed be not excessive, and so we drink the Fram's good health and good progress. I did not say too much. Had I said all that was in my heart, my words would not have been so measured. For to say the truth, we all of us dearly love the ship, as much as it is possible to love any impersonal thing. And why should we not love her? No mother can give her young more warmth and safety under her wings than she affords to us. She is indeed like a home to us. We all rejoice to return to her from out on the icy plains. And when I have been far away and have seen her masts rising over the everlasting mantle of snow, how often has my heart glowed with warmth towards her. To the builder of this home, grateful thoughts often travel during the still nights. He, I feel certain, sits yonder at home often thinking of us, but he knows not where his thought can seek the Fram in the great white tract around the pole. But he knows his child, and though all else lose faith in her, he will believe that she will hold out. Yes, Colin Archer, could you see us now, you would know that your faith in her is not misplaced. I am sitting alone in my berth, and my thoughts glide back over the 2 years that have passed. What demon is it that weaves the threads of our lives, that makes us deceive ourselves and ever sends us forth on paths we have not ourselves laid out, paths on which we have no desire to walk? Was it a mere feeling of duty that impelled me? Oh, no. I was simply a child yearning for a great adventure out in the unknown, who had dreamed of it so long that at last I believe it really awaited me. And it has, indeed, fallen to my lot, the great adventure of the ice, deep and pure as infinity. The silent, starlit polar night, nature itself in its profundity, the mystery of life, the ceaseless circling of the universe, the feast of death, without suffering, without regret, eternal in itself. Here in the great night thou standest, in all thy naked pettiness, face to face with nature, and thou sittest devoutly at the feet of eternity, intently listening, and thou knowest God the all-ruling, the center of the universe. All the riddles of life seem to grow clear to thee, and thou laughest at thyself that thou couldst be consumed by brooding. It is all so little, so unutterably little. Whoso sees Jehovah dies. Sunday, November 4th. At noon I had gone out on a snowshoe expedition and had taken some of the dogs with me. Presently I noticed that those that had been left behind at the ship began to bark. Those with me pricked up their ears, and several of them started off back, with Ulenka at their head. Most of them soon stopped, listening, and looking behind them to see if I were following. I wondered for a little while whether it could be a bear, and then continued on my way. But at length I could stand it no longer, and set off homewards, with the dogs dashing wildly on in front. On approaching the ship I saw some of the men setting off with guns. They were Sverdrup, Johansen, Mogstad, and Henriksen. They had got a good start of me in the direction in which the dogs were barking, before I too got hold of a gun and set off after them. All at once I saw through the darkness the flash of a volley from those in front, followed by another shot, then several more, until at last it sounded like regular platoon firing. What the deuce could it be? They were standing on the same spot and kept firing incessantly. Why on earth did they not advance nearer? I hurried on, thinking it was high time I came up with my snowshoes to follow the game, which must evidently be in full flight. Meanwhile they advanced a little, and then there was another flash to be seen through the darkness, and so they went on 2 or 3 times. One of the number at last dashed forward over the ice and fired straight down in front of him, while another knelt down and fired towards the east. Were they trying their guns? But surely it was a strange time for doing so, and there were so many shots. Meanwhile the dogs tore around over the ice and gathered in clumps, barking furiously. At length I overtook them and saw 3 bears scattered over the ice, a she-bear and 2 cubs, while the dogs lay over them, worrying them like mad and tearing away at paws, throat, and tail. Ulenka especially was beside herself. She had gripped one of the cubs by the throat and worried it like a mad thing, so that it was difficult to get her away. The bears had gone very leisurely away from the dogs, which dared not come to sufficiently close quarters to use their teeth, till the old she-bear had been wounded and had fallen down. The bears indeed had acted in a very suspicious manner. It seemed just as if the she-bear had some deep design, some evil intent in her mind, if she could only have lured the dogs near enough to her. Suddenly she halted, let the cubs go on in front, sniffed a little, and then came back to meet the dogs, who at the same time, as if at a word of command, all turned tail and set off towards the west. It was then that the first shot was fired, and the old bear tottered and fell headlong, when immediately some of the dogs set to and tackled her. One of the cubs then got its quietus, while the other one was fired at and made off over the ice with 3 dogs after it. They soon overtook it and pulled it down, so that when Mogstad came up he was obliged first of all to get the dogs off before he could venture to shoot. It was a glorious slaughter, and by no means unwelcome, for we had that very day eaten the last remains of our last bear in the shape of meat cakes for dinner. The 2 cubs made lovely Christmas pork. In all probability these were the same bears whose tracks we had seen before. Sverdrup and I had followed on the tracks of 3 such animals on the last day of October, and had lost them to north-northwest of the ship. Apparently they had come from that quarter now. When they wanted to shoot, Peter's gun, as usual, would not go off. It had again been drenched with Vaseline, and he kept calling out, "Shoot, shoot, mine won't go off." Afterwards, on examining the gun I had taken with me to the fray, I found there were no cartridges in it. A nice account I should have given of myself had I come on the bears alone with that weapon. Monday, November 5th. As I was sitting at work last night, I heard a dog on the deck howling fearfully. I sprang up and found it was one of the puppies that had touched an iron bolt with its tongue and was frozen fast to it. There the poor beast was, straining to get free, with its tongue stretched out so far that it looked like a thin rope proceeding out of its throat, and it was howling piteously. Benson, whose watch it was, had come up, but scarcely knew what to do. He took hold of it, however, by the neck, and held it close to the bolt, so that its tongue was less extended. After having warmed the bolt somewhat with his hand, he managed to get the tongue free. The poor little puppy seemed overjoyed at its release, and to show its gratitude licked Benson's hand with its bloody tongue, and seemed as if it could not be grateful enough to its deliverer. It is to be hoped that it will be some time before this puppy, at any rate, gets fast again in this way, but such things happen every now and then. Sunday, November 11th. I am pursuing my studies as usual day after day, and they lure me, too, deeper and deeper into the insoluble mystery that lies behind all these inquiries. Nay, why keep revolving in this fruitless circle of thought? Better go out into the winter night. The moon is up, great and yellow and placid. The stars are twinkling overhead through the drifting snow dust. Why not rock yourself into a winter night's dream filled with memories of summer? Ugh, no! The wind is howling too shrilly over the barren ice plains. There are 33 degrees of cold, and summer with its flowers is far, far away. I would give a year of my life to hold them in my embrace. They loom far away in the distance, as if I should never come back to them. But the northern lights, with their eternally shifting loveliness, flame over the heavens each day and each night. Look at them, drink oblivion, and drink hope from them. They are even as the aspiring soul of man. Restless as it is, they will wreathe the whole vault of heaven with their glittering, fleeting light, surpassing all else in their wild loveliness, fairer than even the blush of dawn. But whirling idly through empty space, they bear no message of a coming day. The sailor steers his course by a star. Could you but concentrate yourselves, you too, O northern lights, might lend your aid to guide the wildered wanderer? But dance on, and let me enjoy you. Stretch a bridge across the gulf between the present and the time to come, and let me dream far, far ahead into the future. O thou mysterious radiance, what art thou, and whence comest thou? Yet why ask? Is it not enough to admire thy beauty and pause there? Can we at best get beyond the outward show of things? What would it profit, even if we could say that it is an electric discharge or currents of electricity through the upper regions of the air, and were able to describe in minutest detail how it all came to be? It would be mere words. We know no more what an electric current really is than what the aurora borealis is. Happy is the child. We, with all our views and theories, are not in the last analysis a hair's breadth nearer the truth than it. Tuesday, November 13th. Thermometer minus 38 degrees Celsius, minus 36.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The ice is packing in several quarters during the day, and the roar is pretty loud now that the ice has become colder. It can be heard from afar, a strange roar which would sound uncanny to anyone who did not know what it was. A delightful snowshoe run in the light of the full moon. Is life a vale of tears? Is it such a deplorable fate to dash off like the wind, with all the dogs skipping around one, over the boundless expanse of ice through a night like this in the fresh crackling frost, while the snowshoes glide over the smooth surface so that you scarcely know you are touching the earth, and the stars hang high in the blue vault above? This is more, indeed, than one has any right to expect of life. It is a fairy tale from another world, from a life to come. And then to return home to one's cozy study cabin, kindle the stove, light the lamp, fill a pipe, stretch oneself on the sofa, and send dreams out into the world with the curling clouds of smoke. Is that a dire infliction? Thus I catch myself sitting, staring at the fire for hours together, dreaming myself away, a useful way of employing the time. But at least it makes it slip unnoticed by, until the dreams are swept away in an ice blast of reality, and I sit here in the midst of desolation and nervously set to work again. Wednesday, November 14th. How marvelous are these snowshoe runs through this silent nature! The ice fields stretch all around, bathed in the silver moonlight. Here and there dark, cold shadows project from the hummocks, whose sides faintly reflect the twilight. Far, far out, a dark line marks the horizon, formed by the packed-up ice, over it a shimmer of silvery vapor, and above all, the boundless deep blue starry sky, where the full moon sails through the ether. but in the south is a faint glimmer of day low down of a dark, glowing red hue, and higher up a clear yellow and pale green arch that loses itself in the blue above. The whole melts into a pure harmony, one and indescribable. At times one longs to be able to translate such scenes into music. What mighty chords one would require to interpret them! Silent, oh so silent, you can hear the vibrations of your own nerves. I seem as if I were gliding over and over these plains into infinite space. Is this not an image of what is to come? Eternity and peace are here. Nirvana must be cold and bright as such an eternal star-night. What are all our research and understanding in the midst of this infinity? Friday, November 16th. In the forenoon I went out with Sverdrup on snowshoes in the moonlight, and we talked seriously of the prospects of our drift and of the proposed expedition northwards over the ice in the spring. In the evening we went into the matter more thoroughly in his cabin. I stated my views, in which he entirely coincided. I have of late been meditating a great deal on what is the proper course to pursue, supposing the drift does not take us so far north by the month of March as I had anticipated. But the more I think of it, the more firmly am I persuaded that it is the thing to do. For if it be right to set out at 85 degrees, it must be no less right to set out at 82 degrees or 83 degrees. In either case, we should penetrate into more northerly regions than we should otherwise reach, and this becomes all the more desirable if the Fram herself does not get so far north as we had hoped. If we cannot actually reach the pole, why, we must turn back before reaching it. The main consideration, as I must constantly repeat, is not to reach that exact mathematical point, but to explore the unknown parts of the polar sea, whether these be near to or more remote from the pole. I said this before setting out, and I must keep it continually in mind. Certainly there are many important observations to be made on board during the further drift of the ship, many which I would dearly like to carry on myself. But all the more important of these will be made equally well here, even though 2 of our number leave the ship, and there can scarcely be any doubt that the observations we shall make farther north will not many times outweigh in value those I could have made during the remainder of the time on board. So far, then, it is absolutely desirable that we set out. Then comes the question, what is the best time to start? That the spring, March at the latest, is the only season for such a venture there can be no doubt at all. But shall it be next spring? Suppose, at the worst, we have not advanced farther than to 83 degrees north latitude and 110 degrees east longitude. Then something might be said for waiting till the spring of 1896. But I cannot but think that we should thus, in all probability, let slip the propitious moment. The drifting could not be so wearingly slow but that after another year had elapsed we should be far beyond the point from which the sledge expedition ought to set out. If I measure the distance we have drifted from November of last year with the compasses, and mark off the same distance ahead, by next November we should be north of Franz Josef Land and a little beyond it. It is conceivable, of course, that we were no farther advanced in February 1896 either, but it is more likely from all I can make out that the drift will increase rather than diminish as we work westwards, and consequently in February 1896 we should have got too far, while even if one could imagine a better starting point than that which the Fram will probably offer us by March 1st, 1895, it will at all events be a possible one. It must consequently be the safest plan not to wait for another spring. Such then are the prospects before us of pushing through. The distance from this proposed starting point to Cape Fligely, which is the nearest known land, I set down at about 370 miles. consequently not much more than the distance we covered in Greenland, and that would be easy work enough over this ice, even if it did become somewhat bad towards land. If once a coast is reached, any reasonable being can surely manage to subsist by hunting, whether large or small game, whether bears or sandhoppers. Thus we can always make for Cape Fligely or Petermann's Land, which lies north of it, if our situation becomes untenable. The distance will, of course, be increased the farther we advance northwards, but at no point whatever between here and the pole is it greater than we can and will manage with the help of our dogs. A line of retreat is therefore secured, though there are those doubtless who hold that a barren coast, where you must first scrape your food together before you can eat it, is a poor retreat for hungry men. But that is really an advantage, for such a retreat would not be too alluring. A wretched invention, forsooth, for people who wish to push on, is a line of retreat, an everlasting inducement to look behind, when they should have enough to do in looking ahead. But now for the expedition itself. It will consist of 28 dogs, 2 men, and 2,100 pounds of provisions and equipments. The distance to the pole from 83 degrees is 483 miles. Is it too much to calculate that we may be able to accomplish that distance in 50 days? I do not, of course, know what the staying powers of the dogs may be, but that with 2 men to help they should be able to do 9½ miles a day with 75 pounds each for the first few days sounds sufficiently reasonable, even if they are not very good ones. This, then, can scarcely be called a wild calculation, always, of course, supposing the ice to be as it is here, and there is no reason why it should not be. It, indeed, steadily improves the farther north we get, and it also improves with the approach of spring. In 50 days, then, we should reach the pole. In 65 days we went 345 miles over the inland ice of Greenland at an elevation of more than 8,000 feet without dogs, and with defective provisions, and could certainly have gone considerably farther. In 50 days we shall have consumed a pound of pemmican a day for each dog, that is 1,400 pounds altogether, and 2 pounds of provisions for each man daily is 200 pounds. As some fuel also will have been consumed during this time, the freight on the sledges will have diminished to less than 500 pounds. But a burden like this is nothing for 28 dogs to draw, so that they ought to go ahead like a gale of wind during the latter part of the time, and thus do it in less than the 50 days. However, let us suppose that it takes this time. If all has gone well, we shall now direct our course for the 7 islands north of Spitzbergen. That is 9 degrees or 620 miles. But if we are not in first-rate condition, it will be safer to make for Cape Fligely, or the land to the north of it. Let us suppose we decide on this route. We set out from the Fram on March 1st. If circumstances are favorable, we should start sooner, and therefore arrive at the pole April 30th. We shall have about 500 pounds of our provisions left, enough for another 50 days, but we can spare none for the dogs. We must, therefore, begin killing some of them, either for food for the others or for ourselves, giving our provisions to them. Even if my figures are somewhat too low, I may assume that by the time 23 dogs have been killed, we shall have traveled 41 days and still have 5 dogs left. How far south shall we have advanced in this time? The weight of baggage was, to begin with, less than 500 pounds, that is to say, less than 18 pounds for each dog to draw. After 41 days, this will at least have been reduced to 280 pounds by the consumption of provisions and fuel, and by dispensing with sundry articles of our equipment, such as sleeping bags, tents, etc., etc., which will have become superfluous. There remain then 56 pounds for each of the 5 dogs, if we draw nothing ourselves, and should it be desirable, our equipment might be still further diminished. With a burden of from 18 to 56 pounds apiece, the latter would only be towards the end, the dogs would, on an average, be able to do 13 4/5 miles a day, even if the snow surface should become somewhat more difficult. That is to say, we shall have gone 565 miles to the south, or we shall be 18½ miles past Cape Fligely on June 1st, with 5 dogs and 9 days' provisions left. But it is probable, in the first place, that we shall long before this have reached land, and secondly, so early as the first half of April, the Austrians found open water by Cape Fligely and abundance of birds. Consequently, in May and June we should have no difficulty as regards food, not to mention that it would be strange indeed if we had not before that time met with a bear or a seal or some stray birds. That we should now be pretty safe I consider as certain, and we can choose whichever route we please, either along the northwest coast of Franz Josef Land by Gillis Land towards Northeast Island and Spitzbergen, and should circumstances prove favorable, this would decidedly be my choice, or we can go south through Austria Sound towards the south coast of Franz Josef Land, and thence to Novaya Zemlya or Spitzbergen, the latter by preference. We may, of course, find Englishmen on Franz Josef Land, but that we must not reckon on. Such, then, is my calculation. Have I made it recklessly? No, I think not. The only difficulty would be if during the latter part of the journey, in May, we should find the surface like that we had here last spring at the end of May, and should be considerably delayed by it. But this would only be towards the very end of our time, and at worst it could not be entirely impassable. Besides, it would be strange if we could not manage to average 11½ miles a day during the whole of the journey, with an average load for each dog of from 30 to 40 pounds. It would not be more. However, if our calculations should prove faulty, we can always, as aforesaid, turn back at any moment. What unforeseen obstacles may confront us? 1. The ice may be more impracticable than was supposed. 2. We may meet with land. 3. The dogs may fail us, may sicken or freeze to death. 4. We ourselves may suffer from scurvy. 1 and 2. That the ice may be more impracticable further north is certainly possible, but hardly probable. I can see no reason why it should be, unless we have unknown lands to the north. But should this be so, very well, we must take what chance we find. The ice can scarcely be altogether impassable. Even Markham was able to advance with his scurvy-smitten people, and the coasts of this land may possibly be advantageous for an advance. It simply depends on their direction and extent. It is difficult to say anything beforehand, except that I think the depth of water we have here and the drift of the ice render it improbable that we can have land of any extent at all close at hand. In any case, there must, somewhere or other, be a passage for the ice, and at the worst we can follow that passage. 3. There is always a possibility that the dogs may fail us, but as may be seen, I have not laid out any scheme of excessive work for them. And even if 1 or 2 of them should prove failures, that could not be the case with all. With the food they have hitherto had, they have got through the winter and the cold without mishap, and the food they will get on the journey will be better. In my calculations, moreover, I have taken no account of what we shall draw ourselves, and even supposing all the dogs to fail us, we could manage to get along by ourselves pretty well. 4. The worst event would undeniably be that we ourselves should be attacked by scurvy, and notwithstanding our excellent health, such a contingency is quite conceivable when it is borne in mind how in the English North Pole expedition all the men, with the exception of the officers, suffered from scurvy when the spring and the sledge journeys began, although as long as they were on board ship they had not the remotest suspicion that anything of the kind was lying in wait for them. As far, however, as we are concerned, I consider this contingency very remote. In the first place, the English expedition was remarkably unfortunate, and hardly any others can show a similar experience, although they may have undertaken sledge journeys of equal length, for example, McClintock's. During the retreat of the Jeanette party, so far as is known, no one was attacked with scurvy. Peary and Ostrup did not suffer from scurvy either. Moreover, our supply of provisions has been more carefully selected and offers greater variety than has been the case in former expeditions, not one of which has enjoyed such perfect health as ours. I scarcely think, therefore, that we should take with us from the Fram any germs of scurvy, and as regards the provisions for the sledge journey itself, I have taken care that they shall consist of good, all-round, nutritious articles of food, so that I can scarcely believe that they would be the means of developing an attack of this disease. Of course, one must run some risk, but in my opinion all possible precautions have been taken, and when that is done, it is one's duty to go ahead. There is yet another question that must be taken into consideration. Have I the right to deprive the ship and those who remain behind of the resources such an expedition entails? The fact that there will be 2 men less is of little importance, for the Fram can be handled quite as well with 11 men. A more important point is that we shall have to take with us all the dogs except the 7 puppies, but they are amply supplied with sledge provisions and first-class sledge equipments on board, and it is inconceivable that in case anything happened to the Fram, they should be unable to reach Franz Josef Land or Spitzbergen. It is scarcely likely that in case they had to abandon her, it would be further north than 85 degrees, probably not even so far north. But suppose they were obliged to abandon her at 85 degrees, it would probably be about north of Franz Josef Land, when they would be 207 miles from Cape Fligely, or if further to the east, it would be some 276 miles from the 7 islands, and it is hard to believe that they could not manage a distance like that with our equipments. Now, as before, I am of opinion that the Fram will in all probability drift right across the polar basin and out on the other side without being stopped and without being destroyed. But even if any accident should occur, I do not see why the crew should not be able to make their way home in safety, provided due measures of precaution are observed. Consequently, I think there is no reason why a sledge expedition should not leave the Fram, and I feel that as it promises such good results, it ought certainly to be attempted. End of File 18. End of Farthest North, Volume 1, by Fridtjof Nansen.